Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Morrisville Town Council work session. It's September the 6th, 2016. The time is now 6:30. Mayor Pro Tem Steve Rao will be joining us a little bit later in the meeting. With that update, I will turn it over to Martha Page to take us through tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Mayor. One, I just want to first say thank you to Council for making the time the day after a holiday to come and talk all things capital. But want to keep the projects that you're interested in moving along. This meeting is really about, much less about staff providing you more information and new information, but allowing you to talk amongst yourself about some of the things we've been working on. So we're here to answer questions and help you that way, but really want this to be about your conversations and giving us direction on those items. So if you give me that privilege, I'll push back at you to talk to each other, not to staff if necessary, and make some decisions. Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Todd now.
To start our conversation about the demonstration project for the town center, we have with us project managers Peter Sevelich and Jonathan Peterson.
Great. Thank you, Todd and Martha. Thank you, Mayor and council members. It's our pleasure to be with you tonight. As Todd mentioned, we're here to discuss what we're calling the demonstration project, which is in line with the work that the town has engaged DFI to perform on the town center concept. So our agenda tonight is to quickly review for you the current version of the master plan for the town center concept, identify the strategy of a demonstration project and how that fits into the conceptual plans that you've been presented to date, and then review the timelines. And this is going to feed into a discussion about the Wake County Library partnership and how this demonstration project dovetails very nicely with that. So our objectives will be to hear your feedback about the strategy of the demonstration project and then give you an opportunity to discuss the vision for the type and scale of public or civic uses that you might want to incorporate into the town center plan, in particular into the demonstration project as it relates to the opportunity to coordinate those facility investments with the library. So to revisit the conceptual plans for the town center that you've been presented to date, reflect a 40-acre site with a mix of residential, retail, and office uses laid out in a street grid that will begin to create the feel of a town center for Morrisville. And these private investments will be anchored by and supported by several public investments in civic facilities, including the library, a proposed community center, a town green and open space, which is inclusive of the concept of a wetland center on the northeastern edge, as well as public parking investments located strategically to support the private and the public uses in the town center. The town center plan has been laid out in phases. Phase 1 has been presented to maximize the use of the space that the town currently owns for the town center plan, but also to give you the flexibility to expand into additional property that the town does not yet have control over in the future. So the phasing is sequential, but it still continues to incorporate a mix of public and private uses. So each phase will be reflective of a public-private partnership to begin to create a town center feel.
Can I ask you two questions on this slide? What is the L-shaped building under the word town green? What is that representing?
The L-shaped building is representing a potential facility that could have multiple purposes as a common gathering area, including potential farmers market.
I'm talking about the building itself.
It's representative of a potential bandstand or shelter, something that would provide a shelter on the town green for whatever functions you might incorporate there.
Okay, it looks a lot more substantial in that graphic. The other question I had, the 350 units, where would they be in this picture?
So the private investments are represented in the white boxes. This U shape or C shape that I'm hovering over right now would be approximately 200 units. There'll be several units that are in, these would be more apartment or condo, so multifamily, several stories. These would be townhomes to interface and reflect the townhomes on the other side of Jeremiah Street. And then there would be some upper floors of residential in these buildings here. So they'd be dispersed throughout the town center.
Okay, and the last question on the parking structure, is that the 425 spaces, is that assuming a structured parking lot, or is that on the ground parking?
The 425 spaces could be configured in a lot of different ways, but this currently reflects what would go into the structured parking deck, which is the darker gray rectangle here, and there would be additional on-street and surface parking. Surface parking is reflected in the lighter gray here, and then on-street would be spread out.
Okay, thank you.
So that has been the detail of the conceptual plan that's been presented to date. The idea of a demonstration project is to leverage some of the near-term planned public investments in Town Center, including the library, including road infrastructure along Town Hall Drive, to have a project that will begin to build momentum for the larger vision of Town Center. And in the process, will demonstrate a successful public-private partnership that will attract additional private investment for the later phases of the project. So that is the strategy and concept of the demonstration project. In terms of how that could play out in the Town Center plan that we've been working on with you all, the demonstration project could be this first component of phase one. So working backwards from Town Hall Drive, incorporating the proposed traffic circle, the library, a mixed-use project, which is proposed to be 200 units of residential over roughly 20,000 square feet of commercial space. Again, that's this structure here, and includes also wrapping a parking deck with additional residential uses. And then the parking structure would serve both the library's needs as well as the mixed-use project's needs. And there'd be the opportunity for some efficiencies there in terms of shared parking because of the different peak demands of users of the library and the commercial space compared to users of the residential space. So how does that demonstration project potentially fit in with the multiple project timelines we have going on? This is the demonstration project proposed timeline. What you see at the top are different quarters of the years. So on the far left, we have this period right now where we are between summer and fall of 2016. And the timeline concludes on the far right with spring 2019. So we're looking at roughly a 2.5-year period in this timeline. And what you see is that the completion of the demonstration project, including the mixed-use development and the parking deck development, would be conducted during this time frame, including the additional design, financial analysis, and structuring of a potential public-private partnership to accomplish the deal, identifying and the development partners to execute the deal, negotiating the agreements with them, and then the construction period over roughly a year and a half. So that by spring 2019, the mixed-use project and the parking deck structure could be completed. Coordinating this with the library conceptual timeline that we understand that the county has been operating with in their discussions with you. This is the same period. So again, this summer, fall 2016 through spring 2019, you see that while program development and design is going on with the library site, the town could be identifying the partners for the mixed-use project, and that the construction periods would overlap so that in spring 2019 you're delivering both the library as well as the mixed-use project with the parking deck that will partly serve the library as well as the residential and commercial users. So in essence, that prior image of the demonstration project and all the components in it would be delivered simultaneously for the public and private uses. And one last timeline, and this is a different time frame. These are in years, and so on the far left we have 2015, 2016, which is the period that we've been engaged with you all in the discussion of the town center plan. On the far right we have 2025. Should the town choose to pursue the town center concept and the full build-out, phase 1 and 2, all 40 acres, that could be roughly a 10-year build-out over multiple projects. Acquisition and site control for the additional phases would be here in the early stages and could be going on while the demonstration project, both the public and private uses of that project, are happening in the 2017 through 2019 timeframe. And as mentioned, the strategy is that when that demonstration project is completed or prior to its completion, you're able to build momentum for building out the additional phases of the town center concept. So as you go out in this time frame, obviously all sorts of scenarios could come into play that might accelerate or delay that, but this is a fairly conservative but reasonable time frame to potentially realize the full vision of the town center plan.
A question on this slide. Could you expand what you mean by acquisition and site control and how it relates to what DFI was looking at as far as a partner on the larger site?
Mm-hmm. Let me know if this doesn't answer your question. The acquisition and site control on the larger site is in early stages of conversation. And so at a certain point in time, the town would undertake some memorandum of understanding with regards to that site control and how it fits into the town center plan. You'll see that it's being laid out here to be completed over roughly the next 12 months because we think that's a reasonable time frame in which to do that work. And the idea is to conclude as much of that as possible before really undertaking the big investments in the town center plan, so that although the phasing allows for potentially building out all of phase 1 and then adding on to it for phase 2 of the town center plan, you would like to push as much as possible to have full site control before you even began phase 1. So this is the recognition of the time it takes to get site control, but the goal of consummating that before there's much more investment contemplated.
It sounds like it's still in line with what we talked about last time.
Yeah.
So that hasn't changed.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So this is where we want to just pose a few questions for you all and begin to let you have a discussion. Critical to the demonstration project is identifying what are the additional public uses that the town might want to encourage on that site. And that could be done in conjunction with the county staff and the library development, as has been presented before. You could co-locate additional public or civic uses as a part of the library facility. What are those uses? Where would they be best located within the demonstration project area? You can't really separate those two discussions. The type of use and its location within the site are critical to be considered together. In addition, The other angle is, how do you want to accomplish that goal? Would you like to do it through the partnership with the county, adding space to their plans to build a library? Or if you approve of the demonstration project concept, your partner could be the private sector building the mixed-use project. The commercial space that is contemplated in that plan, that could be programmed as a civic facility. It also means that the space is being put into the tax base. And depending on the use, again, the space could have a second generation or a second life beyond whatever it is that you would want to put into it. So as you think about the build-out of your town center, the uses that go into this demonstration project will begin to attract people to this location of your community, begin to create the vision and the feel of a town center. But as you continue to build it out, maybe that use has a better location in your town center. As a private development project, depending on the requirements of the use, you could imagine that you convert that space back to shell, and that the public use maybe moves into a new facility, potentially the community center when that's built later on, or the wetland center, depending on the use. And so you could imagine that you turn that space back over to private investment. But that all depends on the types and scale of uses that you would want to put into this demonstration project, and if it's a partnership strategy that you would like. So this is where I stop talking, and we let you all mull this over, and we're happy to answer more questions.
Could you put up the graphic of the demonstration
Yes.
project? Okay. All right. Any general questions? I know I've been asking all the questions here. Liz, you want just general questions to make sure we're all hearing the same thing?
You asked, those three questions are important, so I want to get to them, but I need to mull that a little bit, and especially the last comment you made about public use that could then go revert to private. I hadn't kind of thought in those terms, so I need to mull that a little bit. But the last time we talked about this, at least this section here, we talked about the library more at the corner. So I just, and I don't recall seeing this kind of layout. And if we did, I forgot. So just remind me why the parking deck is where it is. Is it?
By corner, do you mean
I'm sorry,
this
by
corner?
Jeremiah and Town Hall Drive.
Yes. I think the decision was put for this conceptual plan. This is certainly not a decision that's been made to put the library at this corner, because it will turn into, if you recall the full vision, it will turn into one of the, quote, main streets into the town center plan. So anchoring that entry to your town center with a prominent civic facility that's going to live for many years. And what you see here in the plan as well is that there's a proposed plaza in front of it that can be kind of an entrance even into the building itself that's very welcoming. That's one thought. Certainly, if there was agreement of all the parties to relocate it to a different corner of this demonstration project, that won't preclude, a rearranging of all the other uses on the site.
Yeah, and my question is not to. I'm fine with this. I was just curious of the explanation. I agree with you. Having the library on the circle here and pulls it more into the development versus on the edge over by Jeremiah, I guess. So.
And certainly that's also very valuable commercial space. So again, depending on the partnership strategy, and if you like this approach, the library has a time frame in which they need to know what land they're working with so they can start their design process. The other components of the demonstration project, you could leave more flexible as you approach the development community to say, we want to see these types of uses. We're willing to support the project with public parking investment. Give us a pitch for how you would integrate all this on the site with the library in this corner. So it could be that you draw a box for the library and then you kind of leave open the canvas for what could happen on the rest of the site, or you might want to be more prescriptive.
A couple new things to me, at least, were this idea of wrapping around the parking structure, which I like, because you saw when they were building that big complex on 54 in Weston, when it first came out of the ground, it was all parking, and I think it was shocking to us all to see that. But when they started putting the living space around it, it mitigated the bulk of it. So I think it's the first time I've seen it like this, and actually it's not too bad. Is it, Michael, I know you're going to ask me about structured parking.
Not really, but I have some questions.
As we go along, is the thought, I mean, this is an incredibly valuable piece of real estate for someone to come in and do a mixed-use development. And I think there's some leverage there as far as, building the parking structure, building some of the road infrastructure, including the turnabout, the circle and things like that. But I would think that we'd be able to leverage, a lot of the things that normally we might have to pay for because it's such a unique piece of property. I didn't mean to cut you off, Liz. Were you, any other thoughts or questions before we...
That was my only question about this particular, about the demonstration project. But I have some more thoughts on the questions when we get there.
All right.
Very important questions.
Yeah. Michael, we'll do a first round, then we'll come back and answer the questions.
No, I like the look. I guess we own all that 4 acres. Is that what we're looking at, just 4 acres inside those roads?
I can let staff maybe speak to that. I believe there is a small piece that's in negotiations.
We own all of it, about 1.5 acres, and that is something we'll be talking soon about. I have that information.
But I don't, for me, it's the timeline. I want to get something in the ground. I think the driving force to me is going to be the library. So do you guys get involved in that or no? I mean, I would assume you wouldn't have to, that our staff and their staff work it out.
Yeah, so I'll go back to the timeline as I answer that. The proposed demonstration project would need to work closely with the library and your staff because ultimately you're going to be delivering the two at the same time. So coordination of construction timelines at the very least and kind of working around each other on the site, assuming that there are 2 different construction teams, is something that would have to be coordinated on. But even stepping back from that, as they're in site design, building design, that you might want to have a development partner for the mixed-use project at the table.
Oh,
and
certainly. So you could use that as a selling point. Yeah, I agree. Okay.
Yeah. So the library can help sell the mixed-use project developer on this. I think also certainly the participation in the parking, the town investing in parking is a big selling point. And so that's an area of coordination with the library because of their parking demands and working with them to make sure that their parking demands are being served with the structured parking, because that obviously takes a little bit longer to build than just the surface parking that would be standard for the branch library. So that is the key piece. To the extent that you have parking that's serving both the library and the mixed-use project, that's the biggest area of coordination. And DFI is here to help with getting the development partner on board and help you in sorting that out as much as you'd like our engagement.
Okay. Yeah, I had kind of thought that maybe with the timing of when the library is and what their parking needs are, because I know that we could maybe partner with them on doubling their parking spaces. Making a smaller deck, but that's down the road. But because I would, it's a code enforcement, I guess. Could they build a library without any parking? The necessary parking, though, would be coming.
Parking's got to be part of it. What DFI is proposing is that the parking structure can be part of that.
The 85 spaces, let's
Yes.
say, that they want. Okay. Yeah, and I was thinking that you could make a simple 2-story. But I do like the wraparound like they envisioned it at Weston. That was very nice. But that seems like that's a tough road to climb to get somebody to do that. But that'd be great if you can.
To do the wrapped parking?
Well, or yes, somebody wanted to partner and do something like that. I'd love it. So.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see that that's a very common building type. And a lot of the product that's being built around the triangle is wrapping the parking deck. You have to have a certain scale of development in order to make that worthwhile, because there's efficiencies that are lost when you wrap the parking. You have a single loaded corridor, meaning you're building residential units on the outbound side that's facing the public domain, and then you have a corridor, and then you have the parking. So private developers building the same corridor but only building half of the leasable square feet. So that's why the public-private partnership on the deck will make it more feasible for them to do that.
Okay, just one last question then. The timeline then, because again, we're going to go forward with the Wake County, so once they start moving, do you think by the spring you'll have somebody that might be interested, or you'll have a better idea on if somebody will or won't? To me, that's the next.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this time frame here where we essentially would, the work DFI has been doing with you all to date has been at the kind of the 50,000 foot level, thinking about the town center plan. And we've laid out a town center plan and a program that we think is financially viable. But moving from that level down to the details of identifying a development partner is another phase of work that we propose happen over the coming months. And then that you would be soliciting the development partner in the spring and hopefully completing your negotiations. So by end of spring next year, we think you could have a partner lined up and then begin the real detailed coordination of how they'll deliver a project that works with the library's timeline.
That one, and I know is that included in RFI or no?
It does, yeah. So what we suggest here, the second line, solicit select private developer in spring, is really that over 3 months you would put out an RFI. We would suggest an RFQ or an RFP to get developers involved, but also have them present some of their team and some of their proposals for the project, and that you'd want to give about at least 60 days to respond, but depending on how much creativity you ask them to put in their proposal, maybe 90 days. And then you should be able to quickly winnow that list down and select someone to then begin negotiations that summer. So that's
how much help do you give? It sounds like you want our staff to do it, right? Is that what happens?
DFI is available to help develop the solicitation, identify partners, get them to proactively respond, not just put it out on the town's website and hope that someone bites. We would work with you all to go out and actively seek those developers and get them interested in the project.
Thank you.
All right. Vicki?
My question's a little bit probably premature, but all I can think of is how will the investment be split with the town and the private partnership? Because the library is county money, there would be shared parking, which would be public and private, and there will be private development. So we've already invested a lot in securing some of the site, but there could be further town money being used for this project as well. The library might need a couple classrooms and that kind of thing. So what is typically done with this kind of project from a municipality perspective?
Because of the long-term strategic nature of parking investments in downtown environments, which this is what this would be. It'd be the first parking deck in the eventual town center. Those are often owned by the local government, operated by the local government, leasing spaces to the private sector. There are scenarios where the private sector could build, own, and operate the parking, and the town would lease spaces. And that structure can work out because it could allow the private sector to get a lower cost of capital if the town has that pre-lease commitment. But generally speaking, the town has a lower cost of capital. They're able to finance the construction of the deck more cheaply than a developer would. And so that allows you to keep parking rates to the public lower. So that would be typically how it's structured, that there would be one entity that owns and operates it with the contributions from the other entities, whether they're public like the county or private like the mixed-use developer. Those contributions could be in the form of a lease for parking so that you have guaranteed income for that parking. But in this case, if you owned and operated, you would finance the development of the deck.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Yeah, can you go back to the slide with the 4 acre? Can you zoom it a little bit? Like, is it possible to zoom?
I'll try.
Nice. The parking deck you're talking about is where it's P or?
P, yes.
Okay. So you have this mixed-use development, right? And do we know how many units that will be approximately?
200 units.
200 units. And where is the parking for that?
It's in the deck.
It's in that deck.
Yes.
So who will pay for that?
Who pays for the operations or the construction?
For construction for the park. Who pays for the parking for the 200 units?
I think that's what we're talking. That's what we're
No,
discussing.
no. I meant to say because it's not just because you have a mixed development.
Yeah. So the idea is that the transaction would be structured where there's one owner, but the other parties that are using the space are leasing it. So if the town owns it, then the spaces that the mixed-use project needs to use for the residential and commercial users, they would lease from the town. If the developer owned it, that's less likely, but that's still a possibility, then the town or the library, whoever, depending on the transaction, would lease the spaces they need from the developer.
And how many parking units on the deck?
There's 400, is it 425 in the deck?
Yeah, so 425, that's the structure. And will that be sufficient for like all the town green and so 200 units will, it's assuming 2 structures, 2 parkings for each unit. That's pretty much taking care of, like it's a full occupancy. It's almost 400 units. So where will you get the space for any town green? If there's an event, where will they go and park?
Okay. So this is partly how the phasing of the project works. So first of all, there's a couple of factors at play when we size the parking requirements. One is the scale of the uses, certainly like the 200 units, but also the mix of uses that are being served by that parking. So the library is not often, maybe every now and then, doing a late night event. So people are not parking at the library overnight, whereas the residences are. And so you can have shared parking, so you can build less parking than if you just added up the sum of the parts, because the mix of uses allows you to get some efficiency there. But specifically with regards to the town green,
Yeah, my only worry is library is only 78 units, if I remember correctly. Like in the last conversation we had, it was around 75 or 70 units required.
yeah.
Parking spaces. Yeah, so that was what in the last conversation. 65.
There is ground parking next to the library in addition to...
There's surface parking.
Yeah, there's 70 of them, and if there's an event in Town Green, like the whole unit is like we doing a structured parking is having a huge event and people drawing there, and if there's 200 units, there's hardly any parking.
Yeah, so a 2-to-1 parking ratio would be 2 parking spaces per unit would be pretty high. It depends on the mix of units, actually. So I think the ultimate number of parking spaces to serve the residential would be dictated by the number of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, et cetera. So if you're just using that kind of math, we would typically suggest a 1.5 spaces per unit as the shorthand to get to a total number of parking spaces demanded by the residential. The vision of the town center is that there would be other strategic investments in parking interspersed that would serve the development around them, this deck here, as well as surface parking here and here, and then on-street parking. So over time, you will have well-distributed parking that can serve the peak demands of some large gatherings, as well as the ongoing demands of the mix of uses that are on the site.
Yeah, so my point goes back to is if 1.5 is used by the mixed development, then why should we pay for the parking?
They'll lease it.
We haven't decided on
No, I don't know. So means, and I mean, are we getting anything out of it? Is by because is there sufficient parking? That's where it boils down to. If like everyone wants to come to Town Green, if there's an event, 100 cars fill up like that.
That's a great question. I think that depends a lot on the use of the town green. So depending on that use, and that's a bit of what we're asking here with the questions of the day are, what do you want those uses to be? That includes the town green. Potentially, we didn't include the town green in the demonstration project. We see that being built out later when you actually have a little bit more of the private investment to continue to support public investments as well as additional parking infrastructure.
Okay. Thank you.
TJ?
Yes. Do you expect that we'll have the same private developer for the demonstration and for phase 1 and phase 2, or does that sometimes change over time?
We would expect that you would get multiple interest in the demonstration project. and so that you would be able to select a development partner, and then the ones that you didn't select may also be interested in additional development. The development partners for the demonstration project might have a specialization in a particular use, in this case, most likely multifamily residential, and some of your additional development would have different uses that you would want to get a different development partner involved. There are a couple of ways you could see it go, which is after the demonstration project, you've again demonstrated a successful public-private partnership, you've built momentum for the town center vision, people actually think it's going to and believe it's going to happen now, the rest of it's going to get built out. You could try to attract a master development partner, someone that sees the vision on the private sector side and wants to orchestrate the pieces. And they would bring in joint venture partners for the specific projects. It would still happen kind of project by project. So the townhome development would likely be an individual project versus the mixed-use office retail would be an individual project. The town could also simply have additional projects, just like the demonstration project, with going out to the market and saying, we want to see this type of private investment. We're willing to make this investment in road infrastructure, in the town green, in the community center, in the parking to make it happen, and continue to solicit partners. And after you've done the demonstration project, we'd imagine that hopefully, again, there'll be multiple parties that come to the table, and the ones that aren't successful would probably want to come back and propose again. So it doesn't have to happen one way or the other.
If you go back to slide 8, I'm curious about the green area that's within the mixed-use development there. Would that be owned by the town, or would that be for the use of the mixed use, or is it up to us? Because I see that as the town green in the meantime.
And it's certainly that's why Eric and the team configured it this way to kind of open up towards the library as opposed to being entirely enclosed, is that you could program that a lot of different ways. That could be very valuable private amenity space for the developer, and they might want to keep that to themselves. That said, if it was an important public interest to have some of that town green space in this demonstration project, then that would be one of the factors that you would go out to the market with. The mix of uses on the ground floor will probably impact a lot what you would do with that space, because if you imagine commercial space that has a public use, then the value of leasing that space either to the town or to other private sector tenants may very well be enhanced by having that green or that courtyard accessible to them as opposed to having it private to the residential users. So it's not, we haven't tried to prescribe it in any way at this time. Try to leave you the flexibility to determine the value of it to you.
Okay, because since we're looking a few years down the road, I really like the idea of people taking their book into that space. Mm-hmm. Especially because the town green to the right, we're not going to have that for a while. So that was just what I'm very interested in there. And it sounds like we're going to be paying for the parking deck. So you sort of thought of that as being part of the road infrastructure? Because a lot of your slides talk about road infrastructure, but they don't actually talk about paying for the parking deck.
Yeah, so with regards to the financial implications of this, we want to get your feedback on the mix of public uses. Again, with regards to the demonstration project, but to the extent it influences the way you think about the entire town center plan, for instance, the community center, our next step will be to take your feedback tonight or deliberations that are to come, incorporate that into our financial analysis, which is in draft form, and then schedule a time to come back and present all that to you in terms of the total investments.
Okay. That's it, I think. Now it's kind of up to us to hammer some stuff out.
Yeah, so just, I had one or two more clarification questions. If you could go back to the 4-acre.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. I know the timeline is that a lot of this would happen concurrently, but I think we'd probably have to have a pretty good idea of the library, the size. We'll talk about what that means to us, but in particular, the parking, I think, would have to be, is the ground parking that's shown, and I know this is just conceptual, but is the ground parking, is that sufficient for the library? Does that give them the spaces they need if you have that and the street parking that's around there?
Yeah. I'll have to follow up with you on that. I think that it's not the entire target number that they've presented to you. It's a portion of it. So okay. Some of it would still need to be parked in the deck.
I don't know that we'd have that answer before we needed it, as far as what to do with the structured parking if we need spaces there. I think there's a...
Well, the size of the deck will be influenced by the scale of the mixed-use development, and we've put out a conceptual program. And so really there are a lot of levers that are moving that would dictate how much parking you would be building in a structured parking deck. And so the idea here was to simply show in a conceptual plan that there could still be some surface parking to address that need for the county to maybe have that direct access to surface parking, but the ratio of surface to structured could be played with.
Okay.
One of the ideas behind the timing of the parking deck is that if it's built in conjunction with the library, and that's parking space that the library needs, then the county could potentially help fund the parking deck as part of their parking needs.
Gotcha, but you're talking about several $1 million. You're talking about doing something that could affect mixed-use development around that one day. I mean, if I was a developer and you said, sorry, we've already built the parking deck, and you're like, well, you know what, if I could have done it, and designed it a certain way, it would be a lot more useful to me. So I don't know. I'm having a little bit of heartburn over the parking. Let's say the mixed-use development doesn't come to be,
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that we have adequate parking for the library without building a parking deck on our own nickel.
Yeah, and we would say if the mixed-use project didn't come to be, which we don't see in our current position, we don't see any reason why it couldn't be if you wanted it to, that you would not build the structured parking at all. There's no justification to build structured parking if you don't have the additional density of private investment on the site.
I guess that was my point. I mean,
yeah.
we should have this in mind that if the mixed-use development doesn't work for some, we had a recession in 18 months or 2 years that just shut down development like it did in 07, 08. Mm-hmm. We'd still want to move forward with the library and get the needed parking without having to invest millions of dollars in a structure that may not be in sync with what a developer wants to do down the road, right. And certainly be a...
And depending on the site plan, if you built surface parking for the library now and you didn't coordinate the projects, it would be more of a headache to coordinate this, but you could still certainly come back and build structured parking in a mixed-use project and maybe build on top of some of the surface parking. Now, the library would probably not be too pleased with having construction going on around the library and maybe having some of their surface parking needs being taken away while the supply was still being built. But, if that kind of worst-case scenario happened, I imagine there'd be ways to work together with everybody.
Okay. All right, do you want to throw up the questions then that you wanted us to address here? So, Council, I think that last time we talked, there was a lot of interest in talking about library and additional space there. We heard what the price tag was approximately per square foot. 400. We'll say 400 plus. So just do the math. If you wanted 1,000 square feet to do a couple classrooms, it's going to cost you $500,000 to do that. I guess the real question is, first question is there some interest? Does everyone have interest in additional space that can be used by the community as that we control on the library site?
Well, I have interest. I think we really need more spaces that we can have programming, and we're out of space at Cedar Fork. We have limited, spaces at the aquatic center, so adding more spaces for programming is definitely something that is a priority for me.
I concur.
I do see it that way too, but at the same time, the bigger plan calls for us to build a community center with 40,000 square feet. So in the back of our minds, and if we're going to add this space, what's it going to revert to at some point, I guess.
Well, so can I tag on to that for a minute? Sure. Because I liked what you said before about that the private, our public uses could maybe in time be turned over to some private use. So now I wonder if we did partner with the library and if we did add on some square footage, could in time could that be turned over to some kind of private use? And the first thing that comes to mind is like a coffee shop, luncheon place, or is that what you were thinking about when you said that, or did you really have anything in mind when you?
The library to some degree.
So what I heard you.
Well,
what is it?
I know. Well, we're having that discussion tonight too, so that's why it would be interesting to have their take. But I'm sorry. So. If the additional public facilities were co-located with the library, built as part of the library, then the question of additional or a replacement private use coming in after and sort of backfilling the town space would really be more a question for the library. Is that a scenario that they're comfortable with? They're comfortable with co-locating with you all, but would they have a lease arrangement with a coffee shop? I'm not sure. That they would be the landlord in that case. If you locate those same public uses in a private development as a part of a commercial lease of space, then turning over that space and releasing it is all part of the business development strategy for the private developer. And so having a credit tenant like the town could help them get financing for their project, because the commercial space is always the riskiest part of a multifamily mixed-use project. So there's advantages to attracting a private developer if you felt you wanted to invest through a lease, not upfront financing. And then the developer would probably very happy once you kind of use the space to the life that you want to, whether that's a 5-year or 7-year or 10-year lease. The town center is now well on its way. They'll have lots of tenants that they could release that to. The question of the library being the owner, I can't answer that question for them if they would be comfortable backfilling with private use. And I know that, and that is a question for them. But you are right. So our investment, this investment that we're going to use, however we use it, whether we partner with the library or help spur additional development, that's.
So, and that's kind of what I was trying to get the temperature. If people are interested in additional space, I think Michael, you have a very valid point, but I counter to that, I'd say that that's probably a good bit of years away, that community center, just the sheer size and the expense and all that. In the meantime, I think there's currently need. I know we're going to get some relief when the historic Christian church's parking lot's expanded and the seniors can use that. But I think there's some additional programming that we could probably put to use immediately at the library. I wouldn't be too worried about that becoming obsolete because, 10 years from now there's a community center or whatever is built. I'd be less concerned about that scenario. But I think, the discussion we should have is, do we want to make it part of the library design? Do we know it's happening? Or do we kind of take that risk and put it in the private and say, well, let's carve out a couple storefronts in this mixed-use area that we can use. We'll save $500,000. We'll get back some of that during, by leasing it from the developer. To me, that's more of a risk as far as time, and there's a money savings. Obviously, if we did that, we wouldn't have to come up with cash, the $500,000 up front.
Yeah.
So go ahead. It's an open discussion here.
For 4,500 square feet, what do we get? Can we go back because that was a discussion that we had last time.
What's 4,500?
The library square.
8,500.
8,500. Yeah. So they said we don't get a whole lot of room, right?
It's one space.
It's the library. We don't get anything.
We don't get anything. Pretty much, it's
a library.
It's library.
Yep.
Yeah, if you want to come here, you can add to our conversation.
What I'll say is we have a standard program of service for an 8,500 square foot library. And we use every square foot of that. And if we start segregating some of those spaces out for other uses, it creates a difference that your library patrons will notice. surfaces we have in a 8,500 square foot building, it's fairly open. It's an open design concept. It gives us flexibility to evolve what surfaces we have in that facility over time. I'll use an example of PCs. Think of a library back in the early 90s before PCs were what is now a standard library surface. There was no space for public computers. And now we are, whether out of design or not, as our collections got a little bit smaller, we've taken out some shelves, made more space available for public computers. But we always have the ability of public computers, the need for public computers go down, we can take those spaces out and fill it with whatever the next trend is. Right now, it's space, it's having access to a plug and Wi-Fi. That's what we're seeing a lot of demand for that. So, but I would say if you start carving out space for a classroom, we would have some feedback to you about how often classrooms or programming rooms, as we call them, would actually be used. And there's a value decisions in that if you want to spend that money in that. Something that we typically do not have in a library that's 8,500.
That's good feedback. So personally, like I've always gone to West Cary, like the regional library. So how much is that? How many square feet is that one?
You're talking about 2.5 times the square footage. And what I would say is, based on the proximity you have to an existing regional library at West and a regional library that's going to be built in downtown here, we pretty much saturated this side of the county with regional libraries. It would be a disproportionate service provision to build another regional library.
So I'm not asking what are like for this 8,500. What are the things which won't be there? Like you won't have like private rooms or so those kind of things. I'm trying to see between 8,500 versus the regional. What are the features which won't be there? Like
I think we're getting off topic a little bit. We're getting 8,500.
So all we know is of getting 8,500.
Yeah.
But what are the things we are not getting? Are we getting a private room?
That doesn't really matter what we're not getting. If we want space, we got to buy it, and we got to work with them and build it at the same time. So it does.
But we're buying space. What are we buying for? That's what the point is.
Well, we're talking about teenage club, different events going on with meeting space is what we're talking about. Correct me if I'm wrong. The regional libraries don't create a bunch of regional space for municipal use.
No, what I would say is what the regional has that other libraries don't have one program room. And everything else is proportionally bigger. So there's a larger collection, more PCs. There's an additional service now. But as far as the interior space, one programming room is
So the discussion we need to have is if we want this extra space, do we build it with the library? Do we wait and build it with the private development? Personally, I think if we're going to do it, we do it with the library because we know that's going to happen. We're sure that that's going to happen. And I think
if I may, there's one other, I think, additional consideration you might need to give. Depends on the type of use, and obviously the scale, but the type of use. If you make the decision to put it into the private project, what you want to put in that use could dictate the type of developer that you get. So if you're putting in a use that will be more likely to attract a certain demographic to the property, the ground floor of the mixed-use project sort of informs the brand of the overall project. So when they think about leasing the residential spaces, they're also thinking about what goes in the ground floor in terms of that first impression. So that's just it's a risk to the town potentially that you would delay including it into the project because you're not running with the library. And there's also the potential risk that if you were very prescriptive about what that use was, it may or may not attract a broad cross-section of developers because you don't want the tail to wag the dog in terms of attracting the mixed-use project that you'd like. That said, if you have a very specific type of development you want to see, a specific demographic you want to target, then your use that you would lease out of that space could support that. It could also detract from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and okay. I don't know that we have that answer. I think in general everyone agrees that we need more programming space, but who that would be, what they would do is probably unknown at this point. Go ahead.
Could I just ask, on slide 8, the library, is that an 8,500 footprint?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we wanted to have more there, we'd have to, if we wanted to use the library space, we'd have to go into the plaza, or we'd have to go up? Or how would we augment that building?
Good question.
Do we have to go up?
You could, if you built laterally, stayed on one floor, then you might be sacrificing, the plaza or the surface parking. Again, depending on exactly the mix of uses in the private development and how much surface parking you put, that number could be negligible. If you give up, it's about 37. It's about 30, we'll call it 350 square feet per parking space. You have 20 parking spaces, you get 7,000 square feet. You almost double. So you could probably easily make that up in the parking deck if you knew that going into the project. So I wouldn't say that the amount of square feet you're talking about, taking it out of the surface parking, is necessarily a big deal if you're building the parking deck. Now, 2 stories, more costly, makes it a more prominent civic facility to kind of be at the gateway to your town. So that's another public interest that you may or may not have, is making the library more of a monumental entry to your town by going up.
So that would make it more than $400 per square foot?
I think you're certainly going to be adding elevators, which they don't have in their budget, and I don't know about the number, the per square foot number you've been operating with, if they would apply that number to every square foot you would add, because some of that number is including the collections, right, and the equipment, FF&E and stuff.
So the $450 per square foot, we took some of our existing numbers and inflated it up to what we think is going to be your construction. But it is a true reflection of, if you're going to expand, everything increases proportionally. So the size of the parking goes up, the size of the key goes up, the exterior and interior, everything goes up. Now that number could potentially come down depending upon the type of use and what is actually programmed into the building. But generally, the county constructs buildings using high quality materials that will have a long lifespan, that prevents us from taking that library offline to do renovations at a more frequent basis. So we're talking about high quality, durable wall finishes up to about 4.5 feet. There could be some savings if we wanted to back off of some of those and use other types of materials in the design for the town use portion.
But the thing that my only thing is not the question of $500,000 or is the question of what we really want out of that space is the key. Is over a period of 10 years, $500,000 is not a big deal, because the library is like a structure that will live for a life, and it's what 1,000 square feet is 400 is like 400,000 with all kind of cost overruns or whatever small things with the kind of taxes that we're getting. Is what will we utilize it for? As the main thing is, do we have a real need? Like if we say we will use it for a certain X thing, that's the best buck for the money, that we don't know what we'll use it for. We all know we want something at space, but what is that we'll use it for? Is the key. I can't think of a single thing back of my mind that what will we use that space for?
Classrooms.
A classroom, and do what?
We need flexibility. We can't do some programming for teens or...
and who will run the program?
That is something the library said that we would be responsible for managing. So that's clear that we would have that programming responsibility.
Teen programming, senior programming, we can expand arts and things like that, like they did the Art Center in Cary. I think it's great. It's just, I'd love to hear how many square feet we need to do something like that. Maybe, does staff have any kind of idea, like a senior center to meet the needs of our growing population would take 3,000 or 4,000 square feet?
We do not have that information, right. but that is the type of decision
right.
we're sort of challenging you with making. You know, multi-purpose space where you don't know what the specific needs are is your basic. If you have specific needs that might not work in certain situations, a couple examples, and both of these I think came from our conversations with the library folks, is seniors in an upper level of a library is not a good idea, nor would a track. So you do have to think along those lines, but the question is really is how much space are you looking for, and then you have some options now as to where you might want to place that space, short term, long term. You're along the right path, but we don't have the answers. You have to tell us what you're looking for so that both the library and DFI know where to go next.
That's why I thought it was so important that he said that he could take away some surface parking and have the library extension be flat, because the senior on the second floor was a problem.
No, we can't go up. I think we missed one of the meetings where going up is not an option. It's just too expensive. We had to put a lid.
It's like 50% more.
I guess two things I just want to say. I came in here tonight. Clearly, we got all the presentation material ahead of time. So without discussion, I kind of was leaning in certain directions. And I came into this meeting tonight thinking that I absolutely 100% wanted to work with the library folks and figure out how to get some additional square footage that we needed. I'm changing my mind a little bit right now based on the discussion. I think maybe I would like to talk some more about how to leverage the space that we need into this mixed-use development and use that to kind of spur that a little bit. Is there anything wrong with going down both these paths right now so that we understand each one of them? I mean, without talking to the library folks, I don't even know what's possible. So I guess right now I kind of want to go down both these paths, and then at some point clearly we have to make a decision and go one way or the other.
So I'll speak real quickly, which is if it's a matter of wanting to maybe add to or scale up the public use, and you see the opportunity with the private investment because you're not sure exactly what scale or exactly what uses, you could go down the path with the library and then think about if you discover in 8 months that you want more space or a different type of space, that you could think about rolling that into the private investment. I don't know what the library's concerns are about when the kind of drop dead or deadline is for no go on their side.
Yeah, and I don't know what they will or will not accept either, and so that would kind of be important to me. I guess, and then the other thing I would say about this whole concept of the additional square footage that we think we need, I do want to hear from somebody on staff to tell me what is it that we need? What is it in Parks and Recs that we're not programming because we don't have the space? What is it that the public is calling in and asking, and I can guess on a little bit of that, but I think I'd want to know what it is that we are missing so we understand what we're going after here, too. I mean, I don't just want to partner with anybody for square footage that's not going to be utilized. So I think that's important to hear from Parks and Rec. I mean,
and I agree that Parks and Rec is a huge component of this, but I don't see it as just Parks and Rec. I think that there are a lot of needs, one being there's really no public facility in town where you can go have a larger meeting, host a dinner. So that's why I think as I talk about it, I'm thinking multifunctional, multi-purpose, so that you have a room that could be a variety of things and that you can scale up and scale down for individual purposes. I mean, that's my input. I don't know if Todd has any more input.
You cannot eat in the library.
You can't eat
Separate entrance.
Well, this is going to be separate. This is going to be
Yeah.
totally separate.
Yeah.
If I could,
Separate.
ask if, do you want to join us up here?
Yeah,
Is that okay if they join us up here so they're on the record?
And I'll just add is the library is here to answer your questions, not try to tell you what you should do either. So just as you talk to the library folks, they're not here. They want to answer your questions, not tell you what you should do.
We have another chair we can pull
Chair,
up.
like
So,
And let me just introduce the library folks here. On the far end down there, we have the library director, Mike Wesselit, and then we also have the deputy director for community services, Jason Horton. And Peter, that's the controller.
welcome, gentlemen. So I guess one of the questions we heard, what can or we can't do if we want additional space, and what is the deadline that you need to have a decision by? In other words, it has to be a minimum of 500. It can be no more than 20,000. We need to know by December 15th.
What I would say is it's not a matter of size. It's a matter of the potential use that you want in the space. And it's also maybe more a matter of timing. The way that we typically work is when we've done this before, we partner with the town of Holly Springs to build a cultural arts center and a library co-located on the same site. Those facilities are almost separate with a shared lobby in between. And the way that we worked that is we figured out what were the program uses that were expected from the town and the cultural arts side. Then we went into a joint planning or a visioning exercise where we looked at several different concepts of a cultural arts center and library sharing the same space. That included a 2-story option, 2 separate buildings without a shared lobby option, and the shared lobby which was ultimately constructed. So for us, what we want to know is what are your potential uses that you want to see in that shared space, and then and then we can go into the design and play around with those different scenarios to see what would fit.
And when would you need this decision by, as far as our input on it?
For us, originally we were looking at around December of this year to at least go into a memorandum of understanding as to the general location, some of the broad agreements on the site, and shared use. We have in our mind a construct for a visioning process. Generally, they take about 3 to 4 months. And the first, if I can just walk through some of the high level of the visioning process, what I would say is it really starts off with listing out all of the potential uses that you may want to put on the table. And then when we put those uses out on the table, we may have feedback for whether or not we think those uses would work. For example, there was some discussion about a coffee bar. We've tried that 2 times in regional libraries that are twice the size, and both times we were not able to get that to work. You know, they came into fashion when Barnes & Nobles really started going up everywhere. People liked the idea of going in, getting a coffee, maybe getting a snack, browsing books, getting something, and then leaving. We tried that within our libraries, and unfortunately we were just not able to make it work. So we provide that type of feedback to you all to take into consideration. Now, we have other parts of the county that have coffee shops near a library, and they feel very strongly they see a large share of their customers come from the library. So we'll share that with you. So getting all the uses out on the table, and then we see possibly in the second meeting
starting to narrow down and prioritize some of those potential uses. Then we would also talk a little bit about the geometry and the potential zoning, any restrictions that we may have on the site. And then we would take that feedback and prepare for a third meeting about a month later, and we would present a conceptual site plan or design of the space that may take what you saw from the DFI proposal a little bit further once we start narrowing down what those uses are and looking at potential building footprints. And that's where we go with the side-by-side alternatives, stacked alternatives, separate buildings alternatives. And then we get into the fourth meeting, and that's where we really are starting to make our decisions. And when we put this on a calendar, we really think we'll be in a position to start making those decisions, assuming we are able to start later in September, have those decisions by December. Now, we can do the visioning process, and it doesn't obligate you to move forward with a shared use facility. But now, in all fairness, there are some costs associated with the visioning process. So once we get to the end, you can then make a decision as to whether or not you want to proceed with the county or possibly go in a different direction. We are happy to work with you on either alternative.
Just from operational, so you kind of understand, we haven't been successful, and I don't know of a lot of libraries that have been successful if we share the building in that we're all walking through the same front door and we're all in the same building and your staff is there with our staff and you only answer these questions and we only answer these questions. It's difficult. We share space at Athens Drive High School. It's difficult to say, you're a public patron, you're a high school patron, this is our book, this is your book, this is our space. That makes it really difficult to share space and get your program. So you really wind up with two flavors. Either you have a separate building or you have the Holly Springs concept where we have a shared building, but it's pretty obviously separated. We could talk about the separate buildings in that we're located on campuses with the Southern Region Center, or we will be, Northern Region Center, Eastern Region Center, so we're with a government building. We're also at Green Road with a recreation center. We're at Leesville, eventually will be a recreational center. Right now it's at a park. That all works well. We have our building, they have their building. There's not much issues. Holly Springs has worked well, but if you go to Holly Springs, there's a pretty significant lobby space that designates their part from our part, so it's not very confusing. We're located in strip malls in a couple of places. The strip malls have been a challenge with things that you wouldn't normally think of, like ventilation. If you have a restaurant somewhere in that strip mall, smoking, anything like that, and you share the ceilings, that you share the ventilation, it becomes a problem. There's a problem with different hours and so on. Jason mentioned the coffee shop. A coffee shop in the library sounds wonderful until you realize where the coffee shop makes most of its money. Coffee shop makes most of its money on people coming into work and stopping for their coffee. We don't open till 9 o'clock. Most people are already at work at 9 o'clock. So they lose all that revenue before most places open. It works better if we're co-located on a campus or in a site together. They can open at 6 o'clock, serve coffee. Our customers show up at 9 o'clock. We're extra business for them in a lot of ways. So those are the kind of things that we can bring to the conversation and talk about. As Jason said, it's not really about the size of your building or anything. It's really about the separation of your services and functions and what you want and what we're doing, And so, for example, the Holly Springs, we can open the library when we need to open it, close it when we need to close it, with no effect on theirs, and they also can do the same thing. There's, of course, like anything, if you're sharing a space, there's a need to coordinate a couple of things, but again, it's not as demanding. I'll tell you, when we're on a campus, like with the region centers or the community centers or so on, there's even less need to coordinate things other than occasionally parking. But again, it's that kind of thing. That the separation is really the key part. So I hope that helps you as you're deciding what are some options for you.
So, I think Liz had a great point, and that is maybe even before this visioning process takes place, that we hear back from staff on, what is staff's ideas? What are the needs as you see them for this additional space? Personally, I'm on the fence if we need it or not. I know we're spending a lot of money on additional parking for the seniors to be able to use the historic Christian church. That's going to hopefully take care of their needs. If there's truly a need for additional programming space, I'm open to that, but I'd like to hear it besides just our thinking. I do know when it's all said and done, the library's there, we're going to say, why didn't we spend the extra $500,000 and get 1,000 feet that we could use for such and such that we hadn't even thought of? So you have to weigh all these things, but I would like to, as a starting point, hear from staff, and I'm not expecting an answer tonight, but maybe to kick off before we do the visioning, what is it that you think we would need the space for?
I think in the past we've talked about, I've heard staff say lack of space, programming for certain kinds of like camps, because we just don't have the space at the existing MAFC. So different types of programs. I mean, we've had there was a camp that came out of the innovation programs that was for kids building apps, and they couldn't find a place, so they did it at the Historic Christian Church. So I think that kind of unique programming that gives youth and kids a chance to do some things in the year-round track out program in the summer that would complement a summer camp, even though we have a Cedar Fork camp. I think also in the past when we've done our CIP, we've looked at the need for maybe a cultural center. And so I've always liked the idea of having someplace in Morrisville where we can have music, arts, book readings, and all of these programming needs providing a differentiation from what libraries are around us. So, if we have an opportunity, of course I'd like to listen to staff, but I think whatever decision we make should be driven on what kind of unique experience can we give to the families of Morrisville. Because, I've heard some people say, well, I don't really have to drive that far to go to the Western Wake Regional Library. So, I'm on the fence of whether we want to just commit to more space until we have that discussion. But I do think that these kinds of uses combined together in an appropriate way could be something that would draw, more people in and, continue to, especially the focus on the families and the kids.
Might not want music going on.
Not music, but I've been to Western Wake Regional where they've come in and played jazz music. They've had jazz music there. Like I've been there when I've taken my kids there. It's wonderful, like a little jazz thing. So you can do programming like that.
I'm hearing two things. All the examples that you've given are talking about a separate building and adding an additional 1,000 or 1,500 square feet. Are you saying that will not be an inclusive of the 8,500 square feet that you're giving, or it has to be completely detached, different unit? Because that's where I'm having a difficult time understanding. You're talking about different lobbying and different things. So what we're talking, from what I'm understanding here, is part of a library where our staff will man it or kind of do it, or then I'm hearing from Martha where she's saying that we don't have a place where, we can have a host a community event. So the two different thought processes are there. I want to know first, do you have where if we pay an additional, say, 1,000 square feet, do you have a plan to incorporate as part of your same unit structure?
So I would say it is not prerequisite that they have to be separate buildings. What I would say is we would want to see is there an ability to secure the library space when the library is not in use, and for the additional space that the town may want to fund to be able to secure, in which we are not responsible for the contents or people coming in and out of that room whenever the town does not operate that space. So whether that is a separate facility or whether or not that's in a shared space, we can work those details out once we get into the design of the building. But what we need to know to start that design process is approximately how much space and what are your uses.
The reason is so important because the footprint doesn't, like my worry is as the footprint increases, you are increasing the overall plan, and just shrinking the parking, shrinking the overall town center and the other thing, and that's where.
I think the difficulty comes in for us is, for example, if there was a wall back here and you said that's county space, it's not town hall space, and the county paid for that room, it's hard to manage that room separately from the building, or if you had a need for that to go past the 9 o'clock hour when we typically close, or you wanted to open in the morning, if we're all walking in that same door and there's security issues or anything else, it's hard to separate your needs from our needs.
I'm going to kind of cut this down a little bit. We're getting way in the weeds here. We have to decide, do we need the space or not? And then if we make the decision we do need it, then we got a whole bunch of people here that can help with those decisions. But I think the initial thing is, do we need it or not? And if the answer is yes, then do we want it in the library, or do we want to wait until put it in private use?
And
that's the bottom line.
I agree. I just add one more thing. Go see the Holly Springs Library and Joint Facility, and it'll be crystal clear. There, in the presentation, there's a layout where you can get the idea of how this is set up. But it is clear the library is separate from Holly Springs Community Center.
I'll add, is, and what I think I understand about your discussion is, if you want 1,000 square feet of meeting space, you will have more you need to construct beyond that. So it's not just 1,000 square feet. What they're indicating is you'd have to have all the support stuff that goes with that as well. So it's not 400,000 or 500,000 if you're talking about a joint with a library conversation. Just want to sort of make that point.
Can I ask, how many square feet is the historic community church? How much usable feet is that?
Jerry, do you know how many square feet the historic Christian church is? Okay. I think I heard from the mayor, and I've got some ideas percolating that maybe staff, not just Parks and Rec, but staff maybe can put together some things we think you need to think about surrounding this, and some ideas that we can work on putting together for you that maybe will make it more productive for either way. I also have some questions I think I can ask, at least as you make your either or choice, and how the timing lines up, that we can work with DFI and library behind the scenes. While both are here, I'd encourage you to ask any more general questions, and then staff can figure out how much time we need to work on that to help you. I think one of the real key things I did here, though, was if you think there's any possibility that you're leaning library, you've got at least four sessions that you as a council are going to need to commit to as a part of that facilitated process, and it would need to start right away. So you have to I think you should have that conversation now. Do you want to, assume that might be the way you go, so that we could start coordinating that time? That's their schedules, that's your schedules, a lot of workload just to coordinate that if you want to have that done. Jason, I hope I didn't speak for you.
Well, I think I talked about the visioning process, what that would take, but I think we need at least one meeting before that to kind of have, let's hear from staff. If if you're not coming up with the reasons we need space, then that might end the conversation right there. If you come back with some real compelling, compelling reason to continue, then we'll continue. But I think it's important to have that initial conversation about what is it that you think we can use the space for.
I could tell you right now, I think we have a lack of larger public meeting space, that we are not meeting our need or the community's need. And we do have programs that we could offer that we currently don't have the capacity to do in any of our buildings. That we could use the same space over multiple things or for dedicated purposes like teen programs and senior programs. I think those are all pretty self-evident needs now. Another thing, though, you haven't talked about, it's been referenced to, is you would have operating costs that you need to talk to. It's not just the capital cost. There's additional operating costs to any of this stuff that you talk about. And what we use the space for, that's not upfit cost. So, for example, if you want a computer lab, we haven't taken into account those kinds of costs yet. So just some more things to think about there. But I think there are some core space needs we aren't meeting now.
And it was my impression that this historic Christian church was more of a temporary placement for the seniors. I don't know if that's large enough to fulfill their needs going forward. Was that ever sort of clarified?
Had that conversation at our
Let me just say a couple things that if we knew what we needed the space for and we want to partner with the library, we do not need to have the visioning process. We can just give the county that feedback and we can move forward. But if we know we want to share the space and we're not sure, then we would need to go through the visioning process.
Okay, just one more, just to beat that up one more time. I agree with Martha. I think the thing we are definitely missing is large space to hold a large group. We don't have that anywhere in town, and that I've heard that come up over and over again. So I guess what I'm thinking about now is, in light of the fact that we're going to put a community center in phase 2, phase 3?
Phase 2.
Do we want to just lease space in a mixed-use environment for the meantime until we have a community center? I actually may be leaning in that direction now. So, and then I also have, as soon as we get off space, I had another comment about what I wanted to see in the demonstration project too.
One quick reaction to that is, if you have the idea of a mixed-use space that has intermittent needs or for use, you're talking about an event space that you could potentially see as a private enterprise where the town already has lined up several potential tenants for that operator. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, certainly as the town, you didn't say this, but I imagine if you were the owner-operator of the space, you could see some source of revenue to offset operating costs from that, potentially, depending on how you want to manage that. But that could be a private enterprise where you can help the private investor operators see the financial feasibility of that particular use because you've already lined up a full calendar of events that they could book.
And you keep, even though there's operating costs, you could generate more revenue, like for different types of camps and programs to offset your costs. So that's.
Any other just general questions for DFI or the library? We're kind of combining the first two pieces of this, but I think it was important to do that.
I'm in favor of a visioning process. I think we have adequate need, and we can decide where to move it, whether it's at the library or at a separate building. But we need to have some very thoughtful discussion.
We need to get there
first.
The calendar's turning.
Yes, that's why I'm saying it now, because
visioning will help us wherever we put the need, even if it's in the private space, it will help us to identify what we're trying to do.
Right.
So I think that's a worthwhile exercise. But just going back to the DFI part, Mark, you mentioned the L-shaped in the town green area. I think we should revisit that as a council because that's something that has not really gotten support to have some kind of amphitheater. That was not something that really did well.
That was going to be my comment.
So If that's something that we want DFI to not really put in that space, we just want a green space, because I don't think that's something that we're willing to pony up the millions of dollars necessary. I think that's feedback we should give them now rather than let them keep that in there.
And that was going to be my comment. I'd like to see, we talked about an amphitheater where there could be live music, there could be a children's theater group, so we've talked about that. And so what I'd like to see is that incorporated in some way from the onset, whether it stays there in that spot or whether it moves over time, because, the town green is there too, and that's the next phase. But it's somehow incorporating that. And I would even entertain how do we work with the library and with that too.
Because that's what they did in Holly Springs.
Mm-hmm.
We put it on the back of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that's something we can swallow if we're still looking at community center down the road. Already, we're really strapped for resources.
Shutting ideas. I think you're shutting down ideas before we've had adequate time to vet them. So don't take anything back yet. Just leave it out there, and we can.
That's generally how I am.
Is council also interested in continuing the conversation about a demonstration project? And I only say that because the town green is not part of the demonstration project. You have some more time to talk about that.
And that's why I said I'd like to make sure that outdoor entertainment is incorporated in some fashion, even from the outset, whether it moves later in time. But yes, I think this is fabulous. Demonstration project, let's go.
That is something we would move forward on simultaneous with any sort of visioning processes, going deeper into the demonstration project and getting you positioned to be able to execute it in coordination with the library, not have it lag. So we would like direction on that.
Yeah, so let's not to, demonstration, that might be a new terminology for some of us here, and it sounds like it's committing. It's not just a, we're going to do this and maybe not. We're committing to the library and some other uses for that piece of property. There is a private component to it if we so choose. There is the balance of public-private with some of the parking, how that's going to be handled, and I imagine some of the other infrastructure could also be looked at that way. I think overall, it's what we need to do to move the town center forward. It's taking, small steps in the right direction on land that we predominantly own. It's within our control. The library's coming. This is it. I mean, I think this is what we all kind of envisioned, 10 years ago when this whole thing started, is to start this. And I think once things start being built there, we'll see that there's a lot more, things will happen, a lot quicker than the last 10 years. So is there anyone, is everyone okay with this notion of a demonstration project? And I know there's some debate on, do we include the town green across the street from it? Is that under our control or not right now? I don't know if that. So if we just keep it the way it was presented.
So the demonstration project is a 4.1 acre, that particular lot.
Yes.
Like with the library, mixed use, and the parking deck.
Correct.
But we are not going into who pays for the parking deck and those kind of details.
That would all be work that we
not
bring to
tonight.
you in the
Not tonight. I have heartburns on that side of the story, like the mixed use and how it is. Like it's like personally, I have problems.
You want to hear from?
And I'll put on my librarian hat for a minute to let you know. I hope this doesn't get lost. And a couple times we've had this conversation. I think I've mentioned this a few times. An 8,500 square foot building with that program of service is incredibly popular. It's a great service. People love the library. We cannot close a library. We cannot move a library. We cannot reduce hours of a library. People love library service. So if you build the building that it is right now with anything additional or anything else, It will be an incredible success. It'll be incredibly popular. People will love it. People will come. They'll go to other things. So if you do nothing but just put in our program, it will be a success and be very popular. And I think it's not something that needs to be added to necessarily. A library is a great structure in itself. When people see the library, they see it as a point of destination. There's a pride in a library by itself. It doesn't need to be part of something else. It doesn't need to be in a grander building. A library is very special to a town and a community. So it's easy when we start talking about all opportunities and everything else to lose track of that. But I think as a librarian, I just want to remind you all that people love their library and they will value that 20 years from now, 100 years from now, or whatever, that you built a library in their town. So just, it's not something, it's not a small thing by itself.
No. And that's why we're here tonight, and we've gotten a lot further in the last year than we had in many years, and it's because we have something, this library has been pushing us. There's a deadline. We got to dedicate the land, so we're totally on board with you on that. Is everyone okay with the demonstration project as laid out in the?
Right. I just want to.
Michael?
My comments like before. I just want to make sure we stay with that timeline. I'd love to see your demonstration project come out in the spring. Have that RFP or whatever we're going to call it. And I want to stay on track with the library. I'm happy to, as you indicated, just put it in and get it going and work on the other stuff as part of that. But I look at them, so I'd like to see them both happen. I know it's going to be an extra work for staff because you're going to have 6 months to get this RFP up and going.
What we're here for. I'm sorry.
If I could just add that that green space within the mixed use, I'd really like that to be accessible to the library users. So I'd like to, if possible, keep that under civic ownership.
And I think
Because
we're going to have
that's our little town
additional
green for
time
now.
to.
Yeah, but that could be something that sort of goes into his calculations.
Well, this sort of relates to the comment I was going to make is what DFI is supposed to bring to you is something that's workable. And you challenge them to bring you what is going to enable you to make this as financially viable as possible. And you will have decisions like that to make. And at some point you'll have to decide those decisions. We're not there yet. They still have to put together that financial model once you've given them their space of land to work with and what your concept is.
Would it help to give them a maximum height for the deck and
I think
the
we're
apartments?
I think at this point that's way premature.
And again, they're going to come and say, if you want this, you need 2 levels, 3 levels, 4 levels, and then you have to decide. So that's part of their process. If you limit it now, you don't know what you can get.
Because it sounds like a lot of the council would like to pay for less of the deck, so that would mean they'd have to go higher with the residential. So I guess,
again, I think we can wait for those kind of detailed discussions.
I think we have to be open to all those conversations.
Vicki, any last comments or anything?
I'm okay, thanks.
Okay, Steve, you okay if we?
Nope.
Okay,
I'm
so I think
fine with the demonstration
DFI.
project.
I think you've got your answer tonight. Is that right? Yeah. Library is so. We're gonna.
I need to go.
Okay. Back to staff and hopefully kick off this. What are we calling your phase? The visioning. We're gonna kick that off and still be on schedule to get you an answer by December, as you had hoped for.
Okay.
So.
We'll work on some timing on things.
One last question, and then we're going to take a break. And
Yeah, the question I have is, for the mixed use, the way I'm looking at it is, you're putting a 300 unit with no parking. It's like I'm having a house with no parking. No, but it is important because...
Well, that's not what they said, though. They said there would be adequate parking if you do the 1.5 per unit.
So that's, the builder is saying that.
We haven't decided who's paying for the parking. So, again, these are details that we can talk about at a later time. But library, I'm going to give you the final word. Anything you'd like to add before we take a break here?
I'll say we're excited about this project, and we think this is going to be such a great asset for Morrisville. Also, I want to say thanks to DFI It was obvious to me when we were looking at their presentation. They've heard some of our feedback and have incorporated some of their feedback into their latest concept, and so we appreciate that.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you all for coming out tonight. We're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break now. We'll reconvene at 8:21. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get back in session now. It's 8:22. Next up is Sidewalks Update with Benjamin Howell. Go ahead, Benjamin. I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. So it's been a little while since we've talked sidewalks, so thought it was a good time to give you an update on we have several projects that are underway that are in various stages. Then we also have our sidewalk construction program. So we wanted to give you an update on all that and get some council direction on a couple things. So again, the presentation overview tonight, give a brief update on Town Center Walking Loop, Cary Parkway and NC 54 sidewalks, and the Church Street CDBG sidewalk, as well as next steps on the sidewalk construction program. So for the lap sidewalk, we're still moving forward on that. We have the plans complete. We're in the process of completing the bid package for submission to NCDOT. We have submitted the first step of our submission to DOT, which is the right-of-way certification package, and we expect to get construction authorization, which will be allow us to go out to bid approximately 4 to 6 weeks once we get the right-of-way certification and the bid package approved. As a reminder, the budget on that project's $287,000 with a town match of $112,100.
Question though on the, sorry, I hate to ask, but cost overruns. What happens when the budget goes over?
That should be a standard.
There's still 39%, or is it?
No. So what happens with LAP in particular for this project? If there's cost overruns and the town won't cede that cost at 100%. Any cost overruns, it would be 100%. However, we would potentially be able to go and ask Campo for additional funding. We've done that before. We did that with NC 54 sidewalk. We've done it already once with this. If we go and ask Campo and they agree to grant us additional LAP funds for the sidewalk project, then those are generally given at a 50-50 match.
Okay, and do you have the option of scaling back a project after it's come in at bid?
Potentially, that's one of the things we would look at for this project. This is one of those projects that may be difficult to scale back because it's already fairly lean to begin with, but we would certainly look and see if there's any areas that we could scale back to try and see some cost savings.
So you have to complete it in essence, or you could say, well, I'm sorry, we just don't. I mean, if it came way over budget, you'd say, hey, we have to, that last half mile we can't do.
Correct. We'd have to talk to Campo about if we change the scope. So if we only constructed a portion of it. However, if the bids came in, they were way high and we just said we don't want to do it right now, we could do that. We technically haven't spent any of the money, and so we're not on the hook for getting back any money to Campo at this point since this was under construction.
Thank you.
And this is the historic walking loop portion, right?
Yep. Next up is Cary Parkway and 54 sidewalk projects. Again, we've completed the plans for both projects, although we're still finishing up a few things on the 54 sidewalk. We're in the process of submitting the final bid package to NCDOT for Cary Parkway sidewalk. We've been working with DOT for the last couple months trying to get our bid package, specifically our specifications booklet that the bids are based on, getting that correct to DOT's liking. We expect to be able to submit that final package for Cary Parkway here, hopefully in the next month or so, and then get the final package for NC 54 submitted within the next couple months. Again, we expect to receive construction authorization within about 4 to 6 weeks after we submit the packages. And we're looking at whether to bid those projects together or separately. And again, those projects were essentially, they're funded individually, but we have a pot of $199,000 for both projects. And there's no town cost if the construction costs come in under $199. If they come in over, we would be responsible for 100% of any cost over that.
Is any of that in the Cary jurisdiction? Are they on the hook for any overruns too, or not?
No. There is a small portion of the Cary Parkway sidewalk in the Cary jurisdiction, but it was a town project, a town of Morrisville project. We did not partner with Cary on that.
We just got permission to build it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Benjamin, on the 54 side of that, with the new development that's pretty much complete, where exactly is this? Is it just Key Bridge to the apartments?
So there's actually two segments on 54 that we folded into one. The first is from Key Bridge to the existing sidewalk in front of the Oaks at Weston Apartments. And so it's about a 200 or 300 foot long section. It's fairly short. And then there's a section from the pretty much in front of the gas station on 54 at Morrisville Parkway. So that's the other section to get folks all the way to Morrisville Parkway.
Okay.
So next up is Church Street CDBG sidewalk project. And this one is the furthest along. This is the one, as a reminder, we partnered with Wake County on. We received CDBG funds, which are Community Development Block Grant funds. The purpose of these funds is to fund projects in lower income areas. So we had to actually go out and qualify this area. This was really our last area of town that will qualify. We opened those bids on August 17th, and the bids did come in higher than the engineer's cost estimates. So the original...
Michael read that.
So, and obviously the next question is, well, how much higher and what were everything? So the original overall project budget was $464,000. And the town provided 20% match of $92,817. Of that original project budget, that included everything: engineering, design, easement acquisition. So we've spent about $80,000 already. I think it's around $76,000 to $80,000 on easement acquisition, engineering, design, permitting, everything. So we have approximately $380,000 left in the project budget. The lowest responsible bid, the apparent lowest responsible bid, came in at $498,226.50. So
say that number again.
$498,226. So with that said, and then the other bids, just to give you an idea, the other bids came in much higher. The next lowest bid was $730,000. So we lucked out in that our lowest bid was only $115,000 more than our budget. So based on information that we've been working with Wake County, we've looked at trying to value engineer the project, see if there's anything we can take out. Unfortunately, there's not. This project, similar to the town center walking loop that we talked about, it's already pretty bare bones. There's not much to it. And so there's not really anything we can take out. We're extremely limited in our right-of-way and our easements and our area through there, so we're doing all we can to get it fit in as it is. So with that, based on the low bids and some of the additional costs that will come in from the construction, we believe Wake County estimates the total additional cost would be approximately $154,000, but that does include some contingency. Because again, once they get in and start constructing it, there may be a few things that they have to, they may have to bring in more dirt than what's in the bid specs, or they may have to use a little bit more concrete or something. So we have some contingency to give us a little bit of a buffer. If the town does decide to move forward with the project, then the total town funding would come to approximately $246,817, or ultimately about 40% of the overall project costs. I've already checked. There's no additional county funding and there's no additional CDBG funding available. So the only way to move forward with this project is for the town to cover the entire amount that is currently over. 154.
150.
Do you have a picture or diagram of how long a sidewalk is it from? Is it from Morrisville Carpenter all the way up?
No, this segment is it's on Church Street. It's from behind Cedar Fork Elementary School, where the existing sidewalk ends, all the way down to Traybrook.
On one side?
On one side, on the west
school side?
Yes, on the school side.
So school children would use it.
It would allow school children on Church Street to use it. It also includes a crosswalk across Church Street at the apartments at Traybrook, and it would create a loop around that upper section of Town Hall and Church from Traybrook to McCrimmon Parkway. So now I know this question would come up. We have looked into it and worked with Wake County to find out if the town does not move forward on the project, what happens. One thing to note on this is a little bit unique for a matching project in that we gave our match up front. We actually paid our match, I think now almost 2 years ago. And so we've paid $92,000. We did get reimbursed for easement acquisition because we had spent some money. So based on that information, if we decided not to move forward with the project, we would receive back approximately $69,900 back from Wake County from our match because money was spent on the project. So we still would be responsible for our match of all the costs that have been spent on that project to date, which are the engineering, design, and easement acquisition.
Who manages the project? We do.
It's all Wake County. So the only things we've really done with the project, we were responsible for easement acquisition. So Blake and Mike Wright did that and did a great job on that. And then we've just been working as liaisons with Wake County. We've helped. We had a public meeting, I think 2 years ago now, on the project. So, but primarily it's been Wake County leading.
Want an answer tonight?
We do need an answer. We don't have to have one tonight, but we do need an answer probably by the end of this month to keep the project moving and on schedule and on as close to a schedule as we can keep it.
So I have a question. If we choose not to fund this project, is there any chance of this stretch of our town getting sidewalks in the future? It seems like we're on the brink of potentially connecting more communities, and that's a goal that we share for greenways and parks. If we back off on this, what's the future going to be, you know?
And that can't really say for certain. This is an area, if you look at there's I believe it's about 7 properties along that entire stretch. They're probably not prime for redevelopment. A couple of them may be, but there's at least 1 or 2 that are really weird shapes. Most of them are in heir property situations even now, where the owners have died and there's multiple property owners. There's, I think, the exception of maybe 1 of the properties, they're for the most part renter occupied. So there's probably not a high likelihood of any time in the near future for the properties to redevelop to get sidewalk on them, you know, outside of the town putting it in. So
that's an important consideration because there's no other catalyst to offer that same value to the walkability.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, more than likely, the cost wouldn't necessarily go down.
I hear you.
I think that's a given. Plus, we probably would, I'm not sure we'd ever get another CDBG grant, even in this area.
No, we probably would not. And we did, I've talked to Wake County a good bit about the CDBG grant, and specifically for this property, for this area, it barely qualified as it was. And they have said that if we wanted to change it too much or even wanted to really push to get more funds, we would have to go back through the qualification process, and the likelihood is that it wouldn't qualify. Because one of the things that they do take into account on the qualification is the number of people and homes served that are in that lower income bracket and the cost of the project. At the time we qualified it, the project was a lower cost. So some of that has changed. So let me move forward, talk about our sidewalk construction program, then I have some questions for you at the end. So just to remind you of the sidewalk construction program, the council approved scoring criteria as part of the policy. You can see them up there on the screen. Generally, it's presence of pedestrian generators, constructability factors, connectivity to existing networks, safety factors, and then citizen or advisory board support of sidewalk segment. As a reminder, the general process is that staff goes through, evaluates the sidewalk segments, we create the scoring, then we meet as a committee and decide and work through which segments to move forward for construction. Based on those scores, we try and do it in order if we can't, or if there's reasons to move or skip projects because of cost or other considerations, then we did build that into the policy. So with that said, the top 6 projects, and the reason we picked 6 for a couple reasons. One, there was a clear cut with the top 6 as far as where they scored versus where on they're scored. And then 2, there's a couple on here that may actually be constructed by NCDOT. And so if we decided not to move forward with those, then we still wanted a decent package of other sidewalk projects. So to go over the projects, there's Airport Boulevard on the west and east side between Perimeter Park Drive and Factory Shops Road, McCrimmon Parkway between Winterwalk Circle and Davis Drive, NC 54 between Carrington Mill Boulevard and Licton Boulevard, Church Street between McCrimmon and Church Street Park, and then Paramount Parkway between Perimeter Park Drive and 3900 and North Paramount Parkway. That number 6 project, one of the other reasons that I did want to pull that in is that that's the location of our transit stops now. We do have, that's the area that Go Triangle is serving, and we do have at least one transit stop on that side of the road that currently does not have any sidewalk around it. It's just a concrete pad. So we felt that was important to add to the list. The Airport Boulevard sidewalk segments, those are currently in the STIP. They were originally not when the STIP was approved last year, and then there was an amendment to the STIP, or the State Transportation Improvement Program. There's an amendment to it sometime, I think this past spring, when they added money to the program. I guess they found some money in their couch cushions. Or, there was some additional funding based on some legislation that had gone through. And so our Airport Boulevard sidewalk projects actually got pulled into the STIP. However, they're currently only funded for construction in 2023. So that is still quite a ways away, but they are currently funded for construction. And they are still the one of the top projects in the division needs category for Division 5. So that list has come out now, and they continue to score extremely well. They're actually the top scoring project, I believe, right now. So it has to do with the scoring criteria they look at as part of that strategic prioritization process, and has to do with the fact that I think for a lot of it, it has to do with the fact that they serve a major employment center. They serve a lot of retail, a good number of hotels. It's really where they are, and the fact that
the old outlet malls, right?
Yeah. So it's from the
shut down, right?
well, but it's from the outlet mall down south, and so it's in front of all those hotels. So there's a lot of generators through there. It's also Airport Boulevard in that area generally has a lot of right-of-way, so there's not any right-of-way issues. And it's, for the most part, would be relatively easy to construct because there's not a lot of grading or anything. There's already curb and gutter there for the most part. So those were some of the factors that had it score well on the state system and also why it scored well in our prioritization.
Any reason we would not just let the state build this?
Yeah, that's what.
Well, and that's one of the questions. I think, one of the discussion points for council is, is council okay with waiting for the state to finish? There are some private development projects that have come through and that have talked to us over the years in this area, and there's still some potential for some private development that could fill in some of the gaps, but they won't fill them all in. So, but that's certainly a discussion point for council.
Do you have, I got to go back and look into your prioritization list where, how much, like those ones, I know it carries a lot of people, but most of the residents are on this side of the town. It's more of the commercial part of the town.
But if you look at where a lot of our sidewalk gaps are, they're primarily in our commercial areas. Most of our residential areas have sidewalks. The town has done a good job over the years of requiring new residential subdivisions to construct sidewalks. So for the most part, most of our sidewalk gaps are on state roads, and for the most part, they're in non-residential areas. They're along NC 54, Airport Boulevard, Aviation Parkway. They're along our bigger roads where we either haven't had much development in a number of years, or that the development there is commercial and is older and maybe wasn't required to put in sidewalks when they were developing.
Question on number 2, does that get us across the crosswalk across McCrimmon's to the other side?
That's certainly something we would want to look at if we move forward with these projects or with that project. The next step, which is my next slide actually, the next step for these projects is to go into engineering, design, and permitting, because none of them have had anything done other than this high-level look to try and score them and see how they rate against each other. So, as I mentioned, Airport Boulevard sidewalks are currently scheduled to be constructed by DOT in 2023. One note on that is that will require a town match of 20% because of how DOT funds these. But again, that's a 20% match versus the town funding 100%. So actually what the town staff is recommending for the next step in the sidewalk construction program would actually be to hire a private engineering firm, one or several, through a competitive process to go through and start designing, if not all 6 of these projects, either if the council decides they don't want to move forward on Airport Boulevard right now, we would want to get those other 4 designed so we have plans ready so that when the funding comes around next year, as long as council decides to fund the sidewalk construction program again next year, we would then have plans ready to go and could immediately move into construction.
Did we not fund, did we not allocate some money this year and some money which was left over from last year?
Yep.
So when you said to fund next year's everything, what happened to the money that
and you're just slightly ahead of me there. So we do, council did provide funding for sidewalk construction this year. Currently our FY17 budget is about $200,000. So, but again, we actually do not have any sidewalk segments that are sitting out there ready to go to construction other than the ones that we spoke about earlier that are funded with other means. So that's why what staff has recommended, if we want to move forward with the sidewalk construction program, is use our currently allocated funding to begin doing engineering design of at least those top 6 projects, or if we don't want to do Airport Boulevard, those top 4 projects, so that if council can allocate money again next year, we then have plans ready to go And once that money's allocated, we can move forward with construction.
I think, if I remember, we have 100,000 for just engineering designs, right? Separate. So.
No, not for the sidewalk construction.
No, that was just separate line item or something.
It's sidewalks. There's no engineering design or construction. It's just sidewalk funding.
Yeah. Apart from that, we had separate line items for 100,000 for engineering design.
It's what we currently.
Project design, but that's little small projects not related to sidewalks. And then there is some pedestrian enhancement money that we put in that could match up with some of these sidewalk projects or not.
One question I had, the transportation fund that we created, the money, could we use some of that? Or, I mean, we've got most of the road, so many things.
That's certainly something council could discuss. I think when you created that capital fund, you didn't necessarily put a lot of requirements on that. However, that may be something council would want to further discuss because I think, there may have been a belief that when that fund was created, it may have been more towards roads versus sidewalks. But that's certainly something council, I think, can discuss. Just to finish up my presentation real quick. So overall, we have a limited budget this year for sidewalk construction. We have 4 sidewalk projects currently that are in some form of either being bid out or have been bid out or getting ready to go to bid. One project has been bid out with costs coming in higher than the estimate. The 3 other projects are expected to go to bid in the next 3 to 4 months. And then, of course, we have the sidewalk construction program, which we have the top 6 projects on that, but they need to have engineer design done first. So a couple notes for the sidewalk construction program. If council moves forward, again, staff would recommend begin using those FY17 funds for engineering design work and either do, design as many of those 6 or 4, one decision point is whether we would want to move forward with the Airport Boulevard sidewalks or not. Or if we would if the council would like to just wait until DOT can construct those. And so based on that, it's either be 4 or 6 projects. And then if we wanted to move forward on that, staff would recommend using our currently allocated funds to begin doing the engineering design work and either use those funds until we get however many of those 4 or 6 projects designed, or if we can do that and still have funds left over, we would then look to see if we could maybe go to even construction using what's left. But again, a couple of important points is we have these other 4 sidewalk projects out there that are further along and one that we know needs additional funding. So that's really why we wanted to present this to council and give y'all a chance to talk about that tonight. We need to get direction on the Church Street CDBG sidewalk project and then direction on how to move forward with the sidewalk construction program.
So Benjamin, just so I have the numbers right, I'm going to throw in the Church Street project in these other 6 because I think they'll have to be, it's the funding's coming from the same place. I think it's, to me, it's almost the number 1 project that we have because of our early commitment to it and the fact that we've already dedicated some funds to it. But just so you said we needed an additional 152,000.
154 is the estimate right now. But again, that includes some contingency, and that's estimating some construction administration costs that may come in a little bit lower. So hopefully we could, I think, ideally it would be less than 154. I don't think it would necessarily be much higher or any higher than 154. But yeah.
So just for argument's sake, we say 154 is what we need for that project. And how much do we have in our budgets and anything to do with sidewalks and pedestrian?
Okay, so we have the 200 for the sidewalk construction program, and then we have the 100 in the pedestrian enhancements.
But we had unused funds, right? Like from last year.
That's included in that 200.
200, but I think there was more than that. We rolled over that we did not use it.
100 of it rolled, and then we added 100 this year.
Does that include the project we have with Cary? Was that like 60,000?
That was rolled into the pedestrian enhancements funding.
That was the connection I'm talking about at Davis Drive, getting the
$78,000.
78. Okay, and that's part
an additional money that is there. We haven't separated it from looking at that part of that project yet.
But it's 78,000 for that. There's 100,000 plus the 200,000. Okay. Any other?
We still need to
budget
that section
related to sidewalk?
No.
And how much do you think we'd need for engineering? If you wanted to, let's say that Airport Boulevard was going to be handled by the DOT, and one day we'll pay our 20%. The engineering on the other ones, or 2 or 3 of them.
That we really don't know at this time. Probably. A lot of it depends, once we start looking at it, how complex the project may be. Probably 15 to 20 per project, 30. Probably, Rich was giving me the go higher, so probably somewhere in the $30,000 to $40,000 range per project.
For engineering and design?
Yeah, and we'd have to survey and do engineering design, and that may include some permitting too. So,
can I ask? I know you're trying to add up.
I'm just trying to get everything laid out on the table, what we have to deal with.
Well, can I just throw this out there because we're talking money here, and now this is adding up. Cha-ching. If we had our own transportation engineer, would that person be able to do this work in house?
Potentially, some of it, yes. And that is certainly one of our, one of the things that's difficult for us is that we have one town engineer. I may have slept in a Holiday Inn Express last night, but I do not have the engineer background. So we do, that's something that could help. That's one of the things that obviously Cary does. They have a large staff of engineers, and so they do a lot of their designs like this in-house, and we just, at this point, don't have that capability due to staff workload.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Go back to adding your money up.
Where I was going with all this is if we wanted to finish the Church Street, we dedicate that money, because I think that's the oldest, most committed project. And then if there's other monies, and if you think that money, and I'm not talking about the 78, I think that's sort of, we need to keep that to that particular sidewalk piece. But then whatever, if there's additional money that can fund 2 or 3 of these other projects, to me, that's kind of the way you do it without having to come up with more money that we don't have.
So I'm confused because I thought there was 2 church streets.
Yeah, and I'm going to clarify.
There are.
The historic walking loop is the oldest project, is it not? It's not this one. It's the other Church Street project that's the oldest one.
Yeah, we started working on the town center walking loop even
How
before.
much more do we need for that?
We don't know yet. We don't know that we will.
Right. So we don't.
Indications are, bids are coming in higher, so we're.
For 3 of the 4, we don't know the answer yet, is really the important point.
But what we do know is the CDGB, project is never coming our way again. And it now requires an estimated $154,000 to complete, but then it would be done.
Right.
And I'm in favor of finishing that. I think we are getting a large match from the county, and it serves a need in our community that will not be met in the foreseeable future. There are still other consequences going on with the other projects that there could be good and bad things coming. So that's a known for me.
How soon will we know about the historical Church Street piece, if that's on track or not?
Hopefully we can get that out to bid in the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay. So if we had to kind of set the rest of the money aside pending that result, and then making some decisions, engineering or Church Street historic loop?
I was going to say, if we can have another 3 months or so, we should have bids. We should be either have bids in hand or be really close to having bids in hand on the other 3 projects and know where they're coming in related to the money that we currently have budgeted for those. And then at that point, we would know a lot more about if we do have money that we can start doing for engineering design for the construction program.
How does the group feel about that? Taking care of the Church Street piece of 154 and then kind of seeing where we are with the other projects and then maybe another decision point later on.
Yeah, I think we need to complete the projects we have in the works right now because the costs are not going down. They're just going to escalate. So I think you complete all the projects we have in the mix right now, and then we'll head to the next list and start going through those as well.
I think that's all we can do. Is everyone okay with that basic concept? I don't mean to short circuit this discussion, but I don't want to speed it up either.
Get her done.
Okay, get her done.
All right.
Anything else?
So I want to make the consensus is pay for this project and hold on other decisions for 90 days, including design work.
Correct.
Yeah, pay for the CDGB project.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We'll have to bring an action to council, I assume.
Yeah, probably so.
Okay. We'll probably go ahead and make that a consent on the 27th, if that's okay with council. Okay.
Okay. All right. Next one is real easy. Morrisville Aquatic Fitness Center.
Oh, yes.
No kidding. All right. Gary, you can join us for this.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you, Benjamin. Okay, next up is the Morrisville Aquatic Fitness Center discussion of the next steps.
Okay, and I, along with Jerry and Matt, put this presentation together, and really what this presentation was really a rehash of all of the conversations you've really had on MAFC since the last major update. It's just to give you what you've talked about. The library really took sort of center stage, and as I put this together, we've captured the comments that were either with an MAFC presentation or with the DFI related to community center, and that was in relation to whether you would consider an aquatic center in the town center or not. The last look at the project cost estimate was really under the direction of we've got $5.7 million in bond referendum money. Council still had some discussion over whether all of that money should be used on this project or not, and then if assuming it would all be related to the project, it would be how to manage those additional improvements you might want to make outside of a pool, or how you would manage the cost of the project with those being ad alternates. So I really don't feel the need to sort of regurgitate this other than to sort of throw it back to you. When we came to you in April about the Partif grant, the conversation was really a $6 million project is what we sort of applied for the Partif grant, recognizing that you would have some room for flexibility, but you really kind of needed to know where you were going. So we do know that last week we did not get that Partif grant award. Doesn't mean we couldn't apply next year. We did get a little bit more information today on those Partif grant awards. 74 projects, 66 projects, of which 32 received some amount of funding. They are dispersed across prosperity zones in the state, so it's not just how high you ranked, it's sort of where you're at. There were 14 projects submitted in Wake County alone, and we were tied for 13th in rating of just the Wake County projects. So that means last. Overall, out of the 66 projects, we were ranked about 36th. So really 32 projects got funded, not too far from sort of in the middle. The PARTIF ranking is really in 5 categories: planning, public involvement, recreation facilities, site suitability, operations, and maintenance. We got full points in site suitability and operations and maintenance, about half or less in those other 3 categories. I can't tell you much more than that, but that's sort of the information we have. There was more money, but there were also a lot of grant requests this year. I think Matt mentioned Wake County submitted 2, got funded for 1. We know Fuquay-Varina got 1. Out of 8 projects funded in Wake County in the last couple of years, 5 of them have been Morrisville projects. So that sort of weighs into some of their subjective decision making as well. And in their mind, we have an active PARTIF grant project with them still with RTP Park. So that's just a little bit of break. It's not closed out yet.
So next year, if we apply for it next year, do you tweak it, or do you think you'll come up with the same results based on what you just went through?
Very much like probably what you hear from Ben. You never know who else is in the pot and where you rank. We are going to continue to try to get some more information about our relative score and what we might be able to do to improve a request. We would be able to request money as long as we didn't have a construction bid. Am I correct on that, Jerry? It's the bid that's the trigger where we would not be able to apply. And if we perhaps were more refined and defined in our process, that could change our score. We don't have that information yet, but it's possible that could occur.
Did you say we cannot apply if we've
bid the project, correct. But as you also might remember, Jerry, the design process, once you make a decision, is 12 to 15 months. So we would be eligible. But we also talked about we don't know how much money will be available because it's now an appropriation rather than a set amount. So we'll just have to sort of reassess again next year. So on the bond page, this is just the summary that the bonds were approved in 2012. The bond language, the official bond language, was 5.7 for parks and recreation improvements, which gives you the authority to use it on any parks and recreation improvements. The 2 projects cited were MAFC and Morrisville Community Park, Phase 3, I think. And over time, there have been different discussions about potential splits of money between those projects, but there's no requirement of any kind, and there's never been any formal action by council about a distribution of that money between the projects. The bond monies are supposed to be spent within 5 years of award. There is a way to extend, that's never your preferred choice. You look to spend money that's been approved by your voters. So we do, in our long-range forecast, have this projected to be issued as bonds in 19. That's still doable. And I may have said the wrong years, haven't I? 7 years. 7 years. I'm sorry. If we would start design, if we would make a decision and start a design in the near future. We are collecting a tax increment. Council's talked about it being 2 cents for the streets and 2 cents for the parks and recreation bonds. It was designed to front design money. It's not really distributed that way because we netted out some of the bond redemption savings as we were figuring out how much the cost of these projects would cost, and that's a lot more technical than we need to get into here. But there is tax increment being collected. We would have to appropriate that design work before we, just very similar to McCrimmon, we'd have to be funding our own design before we'd be able to get bond money. So that is a cash flow consideration that we're collecting those tax increment monies on that money. So that's really the bond basics.
On that, if we assume it's of the 4 cents we've collected, and let's say 1 cent is, just proportionally about 1 cent for the Department of Rec bond, how much is that?
Is Jeannie here?
Jeannie, how much have we collected?
What's our 1 cent tax increment valued at right now? 405?
4.5.
4.10.
Okay.
How many years for the aquatic center or the parks bond? Is that 2 or 3 years?
It's 1.
That's 1 penny. 1 year. Is that what you're asking?
How many years have we collected that 1 penny?
Oh, the 1 penny. We started it back in 2014, and
Correct.
then we added it, the second 2 cents in 2016. 2 cents in 2014, 2 cents additional in 2016.
Right, but the first 2 cents was for the
Transportation.
that was for the bypass.
There was no clear delineation whether the 2 cents were really for this. It was just kind of a conversation.
So
The whole 4 cents for the whole package.
okay, and when did we start collecting the second 2 cents?
Second 2 cents was in 2016.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
The next page of the presentation is one you've seen before. This is the information that was prepared in February 16 with what a renovation project rather than a newly constructed or expanded facility. And this focused really on the pool area. As I look at this, you've got some cost associated with changing the pool. That's the 0 depth and that's the 8 lanes, but $2.5 million is a pool enclosure building. So really all of the costs of this 5.7 are really associated with just the pool area, and there are some relocation of lockers to make it work better together especially for users of the pool. The next highest priority that we talked about in February was that you'd probably need more parking. Then there were some other things that council talked about, including the tennis courts and doing some other renovations in the facility these are cost estimates as we keep talking. Until we start designing, we don't have a more firm cost estimate to share. So even at the basic cost estimate, it's just the pool area and related pool amenities as it was presented to you back in February. And that really is where your project scope decision points remain. It's do you want to proceed with that current base design and scope out those other priorities as alternates? Do you want to change that base project? Do you want to go out and look at other ways of getting cost estimates? In order to do that, again, we have to know what you want in order to get a realistic, at least base cost estimate. The other thing we've talked about today is the town center core. I think council has talked about an aquatics facility may not work in a town center, but you haven't made a definitive decision on that. In our CIP, there's reference to a recreation center in the town center core. And what we have in the DFI concept is a community center. So it's really, what are you looking for there? And then the other basic conversation related to this particular conversation is the role and location of tennis courts. Do they stay at an MAFC because it does affect what you can do there? Or do you modify the Morrisville Community Park project to put them there, or something else you might want to explore?
In the past, we had been approached by You and I and Tony had met them with a potential investor that talked about, constructing courts. I mean, is there any possibility of finding out if there's any partners out there that could take over developing, resurfacing either indoor or outdoor courts? And then
So the one lead we had has not responded after they recognized we weren't talking about them taking it over and making it into a tennis facility and us paying for that. So I don't know how to approach other tennis investors, nor has anyone approached us.
we didn't know the tennis courts, they would provide more areas for parking. That's what I thought. We had last decided that.
Or expanded pool area or some other future expansion of the facility or usage of the facility.
I mean, I would be in favor of, doing what we can to make it the more feasible center if it means more parking without the courts. But I've always been I'm getting more and more firm about doing something at the Morrisville Community Park, having more courts and just to park there. Because we did, in the bond, make that commitment that we were going to focus on that, and then we're doing all of our effort on this. And so I think that's something that we've got to get around.
And let me clarify, the Morrisville Community Park Phase 3 had no tennis courts. It didn't have a court facility as a tennis company. There were just 3 courts?
4 or 5, wasn't it? I think 4.
Yeah.
4 courts. Yeah, people are emailing me that right now you cannot get a tennis court at Church Street Park. You cannot. I mean, it's booked from the morning until 9 at night, and people are going out there sometimes and playing for 2 hours without even playing sets. So I mean, we got to look at enforcement stuff. But I mean, you just can't get a court there.
Do we necessarily, at the base design alternative, do we necessarily need to, can't we keep the tennis courts where they are? Or do they have to go away?
Yeah, well, that would probably be
That's
helpful.
A question.
The existing tennis courts could stay in their current location, current design. Yeah. It does impact the amount of parking that you have available on the site. Base design right now adds a bay of parking in front of the building. That's the only space in that for parking. Renovation brings in more people. Ground parking. So the only option then would be to move tennis courts. They can stay where they are as long as we don't put in parking.
And we surface them though. I mean, those courts.
I think, honestly, when we had the discussion in February, we were just presented the rough estimate and we just applied for Part F and said, if we get the grant, then this is the concept. We'll get a chance to go around and do it. Like the library, can we have sessions to, go more detailed what we want to have? Because we never got a chance to vet out what we want. We have a line item where, proceed with the current alternate or modify the base design or obtain the other cost estimate as an action item. But
So the original concepts were almost exclusively based on council input. And that was where we ended up with the 70 and the 65,000 square foot facilities. And then what we could do on site. But that is what I'm asking you, to have that discussion now on what you want for MAFC.
Yeah, because now we are off the hook with no actually blessing in disguise. We didn't get the grant. But we can go back to, discuss what we want to do and again apply for the grant. Go for the cost estimates. Why was the cost so high? Because at the time we didn't have, the designs go at more specific. Why was the cost so high?
We can't design until you tell us what to design.
Yeah. So then why can't we have some meetings with architects or something that we can sit down.
We don't have architects yet. You have to tell them what you want them to design.
So who can we just have like open meetings? Like
That's what we're here for.
I think what he wants to do is take that basic design
and then have a discussion,
and
open
then everyone
discussion.
Discuss,
yeah.
You know, now that we're not getting the Part F grant, maybe we could do without this, or we need, you know, what could we do here, and look at all the alternatives, I guess.
Yeah, that's all. Like, you know, like I have an open chart and then have a discussion. That's all. Like I'm open, not that anyone have an open discussion with it.
And I think that's what we're here for.
But we didn't prepare for like that kind of a like at least I was not prepared for that kind of a discussion tonight. But
Liz, do you have?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm ready to make a decision because we have talked about this. We have discussed this. We yes, and we voted, the bonds were voted 4 years ago. So if we tell you tonight, we not only want the base project, which is really just an upgraded pool, state-of-the-art pool, and all bid alternatives except for the tennis courts, where are you going to come up with the additional funding for the alternatives? Do we have parkland payment in lieu that you can tap into?
That was one of the conversations. This really isn't parkland payment in lieu eligible type money.
How come?
Parkland payment in lieu funds, primary purpose is being to expand recreation offerings, typically on new construction, because it's being generated by an increased population as new homes are involved.
Okay.
The key there is new population adds new demand, and they're building new facilities to accommodate that new demand. You talk about renovating current facilities.
Got it.
You might be able to make an argument you're expanding some of the capacity at that site, but you couldn't fund the whole project or bulk of it. And I would really want to have a conversation with Frank before we talk about
Okay.
some of it based on the expanded capacity. But typically, it's new construction.
Because I will tell you, I think, clearly we talked about renovating the pool. That was the big piece of that bond question. Well, of course, the question was very vague, but the bond, everything that went into the bond and the advertising that we did and the promotion of it. Clearly, it also included Morrisville Community Park. But I think we need to, okay, so now I have a question before I finish my thought. So then Morrisville Community Park Phase 3, parkland payment in lieu would be eligible. Okay, thank you. Gotcha. Okay, so we have a stream of funds that would get us, okay. Then I would say we need to move forward with the renovation of the Morrisville Aquatics and Fitness Center. And if we don't do some of these alternatives that relate to fitness, I think we're shortchanging the facility and the public. So I would say, I would challenge you all to figure out how to fund that. Tell us how we could move forward with that. But I would eliminate the tennis courts. In the 20 years I'm living here, those tennis courts have never been perfect. They have always been an issue. I think we've resurfaced them several times, and I think we need to kind of cut loose on those and build new tennis courts in the Morrisville Community Park Phase 3.
What extent tennis courts have problems with sub-base when the project was built? It could be the sewer was used, action, whatever. You're just throwing money at it.
But aren't there solutions out there? I've seen them, and I'm sorry to belabor the tennis thing, but I mean, aren't there solutions out there where you can? They have things like sport court. You can get rubberized surfaces and you can lay them over. I've seen them do this at tennis conferences. They can actually take a tennis court and roll it out in a ballroom of a hotel and you can play tennis. I mean,
aesthetically or top of the hard surface.
There's a cost to it, but
Well, it is a cost. Part of the problem you have is not only are we getting separation of cracks, in some places we're getting slight changes in elevation.
yeah, maybe.
So the synthetic materials in that case have a harder time because they didn't want to say.
So it's like a hard to build a new court at that spot anyway. Because the other thing is with the USTA, whether we could go to the USTA Foundation, get grants. They've got a huge grant program for parks for tennis.
Typically, it would be done before.
Okay. Well, I don't think we can continue with those courts in the condition they're in today. They're really unplayable, which leaves us, how long? And I like Liz's idea of focusing on the courts in Morrisville Park, but the question is how long that will be. And then for a long time, we're only going to have 3 courts. We're already booked out to capacity there.
We're still doing some lessons and some games with courts at aquatic and fitness.
Yeah,
so there is some useful in the interim.
Okay.
Sadly, we need that space for parking.
But do you think by then hopefully by then we could have options of having additional courts?
I'm sorry.
Vicki.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I like Liz's approach, and I would be comfortable with that way forward.
Martha, could you put up the cost again so we can see what the alternatives were right there? So there's a list. So Martha, in your page on the next steps, you talked about looking at alternatives and other lower cost options. Do you have the particulars on what you were talking about?
Well, the other thing council has talked about was not doing 8 lanes, doing something different. Again, part of the cost is a building that retracts different than the bubble. The bubble is an annual operating cost, and it takes the facility out of service. So the building itself is a significant portion. I don't know that we've had any conversations about options for that. For example, and I haven't even had a chance to talk to Jerry. I don't know if you could bubble a bigger pool, or if that becomes a not productive. I don't know those answers.
Okay. I think it would. I want to make a decision too, but I also feel like now that we have the decision on the part of grant, we know kind of what our budget is, and if we're talking about $5.7 million plus, I think history has shown that we tend to be a little low sometimes on our estimates. So, the reality might be, are we willing to spend, the extra $500,000 or $600,000 that, 10% more? I'm not even talking about the alternatives, just the base. Or do we scale it back so that it's a, $5 million project, knowing that it could then go up, when the reality hits after the bids are open.
I think you're 100% correct. It's either, I would tell you, scale back or recognize you have to have other sources to support it. That is the real choice, I think.
I don't know. I would like to look at a schematic of this thing now that we know that the part of grant is not in play, and look at it and say, do we really want this? Do we really want that? 8 lanes, 6 lanes, retractable, bubble, and make some of those decisions.
I know.
I don't feel like we've had that chance to. I know that we've talked about it all, and I totally agree we've talked about it. But I think we took a shot. The part of it didn't work out. We got the reality. Now we have to live within our means, and I'd like to see what you mean by alternatives and lower cost options and those things. So I would like to have another session where we have the schematic in front of us, and we can have all these
A mini visioning session in a way?
Yes.
I'm in favor of that.
But with the understanding is we're going to move ahead deliberately, and I don't want to delay this anymore, but I think
Make a
we got
decision.
we got a big thing thrown at us, not in our favor, and we have to deal with it.
Right. I mean, I'm completely. I mean, I think that's a great idea, and I'm not in favor at this point of abandoning the tennis courts because I still would like us to see. I mean, I think there's options out there.
You just said 5 minutes ago you were.
Did.
I'm willing to look at new courts.
I'm not trying to put you on the
No,
spot.
I'm willing to look at new courts, but I want to go back to this idea. I like this idea of, whatever. I know we had this investment group and they weren't takers, but if we could find a private partner out there that's willing to invest and run a tennis facility for us, I think we should consider it.
We've been talking about it for years now, and if either they're going to come or not, and if there are people out there, let's find them right now because we don't have any more time.
Right. Let's go find them.
We need to make some decisions.
Or bring in a tennis consultant to look at the courts and say, can they be done? If they come back and say there's no way, I mean, I believe Jerry, but I think it never hurts to have someone come out and look at it. And if that's the case, then in 3 weeks or whatever, a month, we'll say, hey.
But my caution is, for someone to invest in tennis courts, they're going to want a lot more courts, a lot more, because that's going to be a lot of value for a league or groups. So we don't have
And
that
support
much
facilities, that was an issue. It wasn't just courts, it was facilities that supported the courts, was another part of the issue, that we couldn't meet those needs. And then they want control over running them. So then they're not our courts, they're their courts. So that was just the substance of the conversations we had with the one interested party.
And that's my caution. It's like, it has to be much bigger than what we're even looking for. So it's do the mini visioning, figure out where the tennis courts fit in that as a group.
Look at the budget.
I would like to have a work session to talk only about this with.
I won't talk about tennis anymore.
Okay, and I understand. I want to just sort of, I don't know what you're going to ask with a scaled drawing that you don't already know about the project, because if you're going to ask us how much less is it for 6 lanes than 8, we're not going to have those answers.
I think the disadvantage I feel at the moment is I don't have the drawing in front of me. We're making all these. We're talking about something that I don't, it's been months since I looked at the drawing, and it was all dependent on the part of grant. I was ready to, if we got that, I would say, let's go for it. But we didn't. So now we have to deal with what we have, and maybe it's a short exercise. Maybe there's nothing, but I'd like to look at what was presented before as far as, building footprint, any other options that we had within this, have all these costs there, and we can kind of run through it quickly. I don't think it has to take a lot of time, but I think I feel better if we sort of did the next phase knowing that we've had a discussion about all this stuff. And more in depth. I know we've discussed it already, but now that we have our kind of funding limitations in front of us.
Now we have a known, which is helpful. That's actually a good thing.
So that's fine. I think as part of that conversation, I think I'd like to know, though, the question I asked before, if we move forward with this, because I think this is the scaled down version. There were a couple of versions. So as part of that discussion, if we move forward with what's in front of us right now, how can we do that? I'd like to know if there's a path forward as well.
Absolutely. So Martha, is that one thing? Maybe there's a quicker decision here. We talked. She said we've never made a decision about this facility, the pool being at town center. Personally, I thought we kind of, we committed to this site, and maybe that would say no to, I know there's a little piece of property in phase 3 for a community center, whatever that means. But I don't know that we'd build a second aquatic center or take this and move it there. I thought we were past that decision.
I think we can leave the pool where it is, and then we can be more open to a lot of different options for community center at the wetland center. I think that really gives us a lot more flexibility.
I agree.
Anyone disagree with that? This is where the pool is, and
Well, I'd rather see it move, but again, I know I'm in a minority, so.
well, I can tell you it's going to be a whole lot more than this. It's going to be 3 or 4 times.
That's right.
Well, no, I think I think there'd be some benefit to moving it closer to a greenway, closer to the center of town, closer to where we're already having a thing. But yeah, I'm talking about a pool, not a whole fitness center.
I think, if we renovate it, I think the use will pick up, and I think it's pretty well loved in its current location, even though it's not necessarily in the middle of all that. So is everyone okay if we kind of do a visioning session with this, Martha, with the
Yeah, I think we should go with this space and the alternates.
Okay.
Are you ready to make a decision about use of the 5.7 on MAFC so that we could start working on putting the Morrisville Community Park needs a capital project concept if you're not going to devote any of the bond proceeds to that project? Or do you want to defer that till after you have this visioning session?
Defer.
I'd rather defer, but Liz hit on a good point that we might have to use Parkland payment in lieu as a funding mechanism for that piece. Obviously, we're capped out.
Well, and if you know that, take it off your table is sort of what I'm suggesting.
Let's have that decision during the visioning to make sure that it's the case, because right now I'm not dealing with all the information I'd like to see.
I don't think that we pull money back from this to put it to that, though. So I think that's a point.
Yeah, I can't see doing that just because of the way the numbers are, but I know
so if we
also don't want to ignore what is the public wanted, and so I want to see what are our alternatives, both in any overage here and in that one.
And we've got to be cognizant on payment of flow, because people will say, you got a 5.7 years in the payment of flow for something. So,
well, we can't use it here, so.
Yeah, so we've got to be very cognizant of how we use it.
So can I ask a timeline kind of question? How quickly can we move forward on Morrisville Community Park Phase 3, knowing that we have the Greenway project in the works, we have potentially this project coming up in the works, so...
The Greenway project is going to be a key part of that.
Yeah.
Cost that would be funding up.
Yeah, we'll be bringing... Sorry, Jerry. We'll be bringing an update on the fund balance and those related reserves after the audit in late October. Okay. And we do have some of those known variables. And this is technically a known. We know that we would have to front design costs, so that would be an appropriation of money for even this before we get to MCP. Okay. But again, you'd have to design it. We'd have to put together the project concept, and it sounds like council may be wanting to explore even that from its original vision as well.
Okay, so I guess I just want there is a path forward to get all these projects done. Timeline unknown right now. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Yep. In end of September. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, good. Thank you.
What you need on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to need we'll work on just some timing of stuff. I'm not prepared to answer that right now, just to see when we can get it back through you and make sure that we're productive in how we schedule these things.
Yeah, I think it needs a dedicated session.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
5 other things.
Okay.
You ready to move on? Okay. You guys okay? You want to take a break, or do you want to continue?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the last session is productive at all until we have some more of these other things done.
I agree.
Okay.
Jeannie, do you want to drop this thing off the agenda?
Yes, your most important conversation, when you left off with your budget conversation and approved your budget, was to talk about these special projects and the opportunities. So this is your key conversations that you're having right now, and I think you need to continue working through like your visioning sessions and get a little more ground on your feet of where and how this may impact your CIP and your future available funding that may come with your fund balance and be able to plan and have an effective CIP conversation moving forward. So I'm letting you off the hook tonight.
Okay. Town manager, anything else?
Excuse me. No, I think that's it.
Okay. Council, any other questions or comments on any of these items before we adjourn?
No.
No. Okay. Thank you all and staff and the audience. Thank you all very much for making time and post-holiday week to come here. We do have a town meeting next Tuesday.
We do.
And the only announcement I have, it's not on this before the adjournment, is this Thursday there's going to be a Wake Transit referendum kickoff meeting at 10 a.m. down at Shaw University. I'm one of the co-chairs of that, so either come in person and see the kickoff, or I'm sure it'll be covered by the media pretty heavily. But it's there are four chair people: Dr. DeBrow with Shaw, John Kane, myself, and the mayor of Nightdale. His name is James Roberson. So that's the four co-chairs of that, and we're going to kick off the bond referendum at that point.
Great.
Okay. No further business. If someone could make a motion to adjourn.
A second.
Motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're now adjourned. It's 9:37. Thank you all.